Tonight, you'll discover a profound secret that Buddhist monks have preserved for over 2,000 years to transform restless nights into gateways of deep wisdom and peaceful rest. I'm going to share with you 12 sacred teachings, each one a jewel of ancient understanding that has guided countless souls from the chaos of daily life into the sanctuary of inner peace. Each story contains a timeless truth that dissolves the barriers between your worried mind and the natural tranquility that is your birthright. And here's what makes tonight's journey different from ordinary relaxation techniques. These teachings don't require you to change anything about yourself or achieve any special state. They work by revealing what Buddhist monks have always known, that peace is not something you create, but something you uncover. Even if meditation feels foreign to you, even if your thoughts seem impossible to quiet, even if you've tried countless methods without success, the Buddha himself taught, you yourself, as much as anybody in the entire universe, deserve your love and kindness. In the next 3 hours, you'll discover how this ancient wisdom applies to the simple act of rest. As we journey together through stories of wise monks, patient gardens, and the gentle teachings that flow like water through troubled minds, something profound will begin to happen. The knots of tension in your body will slowly unwind. The endless chatter in your mind will gradually settle, and you'll find yourself naturally floating toward the deep, restorative sleep that has been waiting for you all along. So allow yourself to settle completely now. Feel the weight of your body sinking into whatever supports you. Let your breathing slow and deepen. Take one conscious breath with me now, drawing in all the peace this moment offers. And as you exhale, release everything from this day that no longer serves you. You've just begun a journey that connects you to thousands of years of wisdom, a path that leads not away from your human experience, but deeply into the heart of what it means to find rest in an uncertain world. Let's begin with our first teaching. In a mountain monastery hidden among ancient pine trees, there lived a monk named Kenjiro who tended a small garden behind the meditation hall. For 20 years, he had found peace in the simple rhythm of planting, watering, and harvesting the vegetables that fed his fellow monks. His garden was modest but carefully kept, each plant given exactly what it needed to flourish. One spring morning, as Kenjiro knelt among the young lettuce seedlings, a butterfly appeared. It was unlike any he had ever seen. Its wings shimmered with colors that seemed to shift between deep blue and silver, catching the early sunlight like fragments of sky. The butterfly alighted on his shoulder and remained there as he worked, occasionally fluttering to nearby flowers before returning to rest near him. This became their daily ritual. Each morning, as the first bells called the monks to meditation, the butterfly would appear. It would accompany Kenjiro through his gardening tasks, sometimes resting on his wrist as he planted seeds, sometimes dancing around his head as he pulled weeds. The monk found himself looking forward to these visits with an intensity that surprised him. "My beautiful friend returns," he would whisper, feeling his heart lift each time those iridescent wings caught the light. The butterfly became the brightest part of his day, a living jewel that transformed ordinary garden work into something magical. As weeks passed, Kenjiro began to notice how much his contentment depended on the butterfly's presence. On overcast mornings, when it arrived late, he felt unsettled. When it flew away earlier than usual, disappointment would cloud his peaceful mind. He found himself planning his garden work around the butterfly's preferences, planting flowers he hoped would keep it nearby longer. One morning in late summer, the butterfly did not come. Kenjiro waited, working slowly, glancing up at every shadow and flutter of leaves. but the garden remained empty of his shimmering companion. By evening, worry had taken root in his heart like a weed. The next day brought no butterfly, nor the next. As days became a week, Kenjiro's peace crumbled. He could barely concentrate during meditation, his mind searching the memory of iridescent wings. The garden work he had loved for decades now felt hollow and mechanical. Even the vegetables seemed to grow less well under his distracted care. His teacher, an elderly monk named Master Isin, who had guided the monastery for 40 years, noticed Kenjiro's troubled state during their weekly meeting. "Your face carries worry, my friend," the old master observed gently. "What disturbs your peace?" Kenjiro hesitated, then poured out his story, the butterfly's daily visits, the joy it had brought, and the ache of its disappearance. "I know attachment causes suffering," he concluded, "but how can something so beautiful bring such pain?" Master Isin listened with the patient attention that had made him beloved by generations of students. When Kenjiro finished, the old teacher rose and walked to the window overlooking the garden. For a long moment, he gazed at the morning landscape where mist still clung to the distant mountains. "Tell me," Master Isin said finally, "what made your butterfly friend most beautiful to you?" "The way it moved so freely," Kenjiro replied without hesitation. "How it danced from flower to flower, never staying long in one place. It was like watching freedom itself." The master nodded slowly. "And yet you wanted to keep this freedom close to you, to make it reliable and permanent. Do you see the contradiction in this desire?" As the words settled in his mind, Kenjiro felt something shift inside him. He had loved the butterfly's wild freedom while simultaneously wishing to tame it, to make it his. In trying to possess what he cherished, he had lost sight of what made it precious in the first place. "The butterfly taught you about beauty's true nature," Master Isin continued. "Beauty is not diminished by being temporary. It is made more precious because it cannot be held. Your friend gave you moments of pure gift, expecting nothing in return. Can you honor that gift by releasing your grip on it?" That evening, Kenjiro sat in his garden as twilight painted the sky in soft purples and golds. For the first time since the butterfly had vanished, he felt truly present with what surrounded him: the evening breeze, the scent of ripening tomatoes, the first stars emerging overhead. His heart still held the memory of iridescent wings, but now it felt like gratitude rather than loss. As if drawn by his peaceful presence, a small brown moth appeared in the gathering dusk, drawn to the single candle he had lit beside him. Kenjiro watched its humble dance around the flame and found himself smiling. This simple creature, with none of his butterfly's spectacular beauty, moved with the same freedom, the same uncapturable essence. "Thank you, friend," he whispered to the moth, to the memory of the butterfly, to the evening itself that held them all so gently. The Buddha taught, attachment is the root of suffering. But this truth goes deeper than simply avoiding close connections. True attachment occurs when we try to make permanent what is naturally flowing, when we attempt to possess what can only be received as gift. Why do we so readily confuse love with ownership? Buddhist understanding points to our deep fear of loss, our difficulty accepting that everything beautiful in life comes to us temporarily. We believe that by holding tightly, we can prevent change. But like Kenjiro, with his butterfly, this very grasping destroys what we hope to preserve. The butterfly in this story represents all the fleeting beauties that grace our lives: a child's laughter, a moment of perfect understanding with a friend, the feeling of health and vitality in our bodies, even the simple pleasure of a peaceful mind. When we can appreciate these gifts without demanding they last forever, they bless us fully. When we cling to them, they become sources of anxiety and pain. Buddhist monks learn to practice what is called loving without grasping. This means opening the heart completely while keeping the hands relaxed. It's the difference between a clenched fist and an open palm. Both can receive, but only the open palm can do so without crushing what it holds. In the Japanese aesthetic tradition, there is a concept called mono no aware, the bittersweet awareness of the impermanence of all things. It's the feeling of poignant beauty that comes from recognizing that this moment, this experience, this season will not come again. Rather than diminishing beauty, this awareness intensifies it, making each encounter precious precisely because it cannot be repeated. Consider the moments in your own life when you felt most alive and present. Often these were times when you were fully receiving an experience without trying to control or extend it, watching a sunrise, listening to music that moved you, feeling deeply understood by another person. The magic in these moments came not from their permanence, but from your complete availability to them. Tonight, as your mind naturally moves toward rest, you can practice the butterfly's teaching. Notice any thoughts or worries you might be grasping, trying to solve or control. Can you observe them with the same gentle attention Kenjiro learned to give his garden, present and caring, but not demanding that they stay or go according to your preferences? The Buddha said, "Let go of the past. Let go of the future. Let go of the present, and cross over to the farther shore of existence." This doesn't mean becoming disconnected from life, but learning to love so fully that your love doesn't depend on permanence. As you drift toward sleep, imagine yourself like Kenjiro in his garden at twilight, appreciating whatever appears in the space of your awareness without needing to keep it there. Each breath is like a visiting butterfly, beautiful, temporary, perfect, just as it is. In learning to receive these moments without grasping, you discover a kind of love that cannot be lost because it never tried to possess what it cherished. Now that we have explored the gentle art of loving without grasping, let us journey to a place where an entire community learned to discover the profound gifts hidden within what they first perceived as loss. Our next teaching comes from a village nestled high in the mountains, where silence became the greatest teacher of all. High in the mountains of ancient Tibet, nestled between two peaks that touched the clouds, lay a small village called Pemelin. For 300 years, the villagers had awakened each morning to the sound of a great bronze bell that hung in the monastery tower at the village center. The bell's voice was legendary, deep and resonant. It could be heard for miles across the valleys, calling monks to prayer and reminding everyone of the sacred rhythm that connected all life. The bell had been cast by master craftsmen and blessed by countless generations of lamas. Its tone was so pure that travelers would journey for weeks just to hear it ring. The villagers took great pride in their bell, and its daily chiming marked not just the hours of prayer, but the heartbeat of their community. Then one autumn morning, the bell fell silent. Pemba, the village goldsmith, was the first to notice. He had risen early to work on a delicate bracelet, timing his hammer strikes to the rhythm of the morning bells. When the first bell failed to sound, he paused, thinking perhaps old Tenzin, the monastery's bellkeeper, had overslept. But as the minutes passed in unprecedented silence, worry began to creep into his heart. Soon, other villagers noticed the unusual quiet. Children stopped their play, unconsciously listening for the familiar bronze voice that should have marked the noon prayer. Merchants paused in their shops, feeling somehow disconnected from the flow of their day. Even the animals seemed restless, as if they too sensed that something essential was missing from their world. By evening, a group of concerned villagers had climbed to the monastery to investigate. They found Tenzin standing in the bell tower, his weathered face etched with distress. The great bell hung as it always had, but when he pulled the rope, it produced no sound at all, not even the whisper of metal on metal. "I don't understand it," Tenzin said, his voice heavy with decades of devotion to his simple task. "The bell appears unchanged. The rope is strong. The mechanisms work perfectly, but it has lost its voice. I fear our village has been cursed." Word of the silent bell spread quickly through people. Some villagers spoke of bad omens and gathered to discuss what sins might have brought this misfortune upon them. Others suggested practical solutions. Perhaps the bell could be recast, or a new one commissioned from the monastery in the distant valley. A few began to panic, wondering if the silence meant their prayers would no longer reach the heavens. As days passed without the familiar chiming, the village began to change in unexpected ways. People became irritable and disconnected. Meditation sessions felt hollow. Work rhythms faltered. Even conversations seemed to lack their usual harmony. The villagers realized how much they had depended on the bell's voice to unify their daily life. After a week of distressing silence, a wandering teacher arrived in Pemela. She was an elderly nun named Arni Dolma, known throughout the region for her profound wisdom and unconventional teaching methods. The villagers immediately surrounded her, pouring out their troubles about the silent bell and begging for her help in restoring its voice. Arni Dolma listened with the deep attention that marked truly wise teachers. When the villagers finished their explanations, she asked a simple question: "What did you hear before the bell began to speak?" The villagers looked confused. "Nothing," several replied. "There was only silence before the bell rang." "And what do you hear now, in the spaces between your words?" The teacher continued. "Well, silence again," Pemba admitted, beginning to sense where this inquiry might lead. Arni Dolma smiled with the gentleness of someone who had spent decades discovering truth in unexpected places. "Walk with me to the bell tower," she said. The entire village followed as she climbed the winding path to the monastery. When they reached the bell tower, she stood beneath the great bronze dome that had fallen silent. For several minutes, she simply listened, her eyes closed and her face peaceful. "Ring the bell, Tenzin," she said finally. The old bellkeeper pulled the rope as he had countless times before. The bell swayed. The clapper struck the bronze, and no sound emerged. But instead of frustration or disappointment, Arni Dolma's face lit up with delight. "Do you hear that?" she asked the confused villagers. "Hear what?" they replied. "There's nothing to hear." "Exactly," she said with quiet joy. "Listen more deeply. What is the sound of silence itself?" As the villagers stood in the tower's quiet space, something remarkable began to happen. Freed from waiting for the familiar bronze voice, their attention opened to sounds they had never noticed before. The whisper of wind through the prayer flags, the distant murmur of the stream that fed their barley fields, the soft breathing of the people around them, the subtle creak of wooden beams that had held this tower for centuries. "Your bell has not lost its voice," Arni Dolma explained gently. "It has given you the gift of learning to hear what was always present but hidden beneath its ringing. The silence you fear is not empty. It is full of the 10,000 voices you never noticed." When they were covered by the bronze, she gestured toward the valley below, where life continued in its ancient patterns despite the absence of the familiar chimes. Look how the sun still rises without a bell to announce it. See how the children play without bronze voice to time their games. Notice how your hearts continue to beat in rhythm with something far deeper than any human-made sound. Over the following days, guided by Ani Dalma's gentle teaching, the villagers began to discover the richness hidden within silence. Pemba found that his metalwork became more precise when he listened to the subtle sounds of the metal itself rather than timing his strikes to external bells. Children discovered that their games were more creative when they followed their own internal rhythms, rather than structured periods marked by chiming. Most surprisingly, the monks found that their meditation grew deeper and more focused without the interruption of the bell's call. They began to notice the natural rhythms of their breath and heartbeat, learning to attune to the silence that existed not just between sounds, but within them. After a month of learning to live with silence, something remarkable happened. On a clear morning, when the village had gathered for their daily meditation, now guided by internal awareness rather than external signals, young Extenzin pulled the bell rope one more time, as he had for weeks, expecting nothing but the gift of silence. This time, the bell rang. Its voice was as pure and resonant as ever, but now the villagers heard it differently. Instead of a sound that covered the silence, they recognized it as a voice that emerged from silence and returned to silence, like a wave rising from the ocean and dissolving back into its source. "Now you understand," Ani Dalma said, preparing to continue her journey to the next valley. "The bell was never what created the sacred in your lives. The sacred was always here, in the silence that holds all sounds. Your bell can ring now because you no longer need it to ring. You have found the source from which all true sounds arise." The Buddha taught, "In the end, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends." But there is an even deeper teaching here about the nature of silence itself. In Buddhist understanding, silence is not the absence of sound, but the spacious awareness from which all sounds arise and into which they dissolve. Why do we fear silence so deeply in our modern world? Buddhist psychology points to our conditioning to equate noise with life and silence with death or emptiness. We fill our days with constant stimulation, music, conversation, television, the endless chatter of our own thoughts, believing this keeps us connected to vitality. But like the villagers, depending on their bell, this constant noise can actually separate us from the deeper rhythms that truly sustain us. The ancient Buddhist practice of noble silence, Ariyatushnambhava, is not about suppressing sound or communication, but about discovering the profound fullness that exists in quiet awareness. When we stop filling every moment with noise, we begin to hear what the silence contains, our own wisdom, the subtle communications of our bodies, the gentle guidance of intuition that speaks too softly to be heard above the constant chatter. In meditation practice, students often struggle with what they perceive as emptiness when thoughts quiet down. They worry that nothing is happening, that they're doing something wrong. But experienced practitioners know that this silence is not empty, but pregnant with possibility, like the pause between breaths that contains infinite potential for the next breath to arise. The Japanese have a beautiful concept called ma, the meaningful pause, the fertile emptiness that gives shape to all expression. In music, ma is the silence between notes that creates rhythm and allows melody to emerge. In conversation, it's the thoughtful pause that allows understanding to deepen. In daily life, it's the quiet moments of transition that allow us to digest our experiences and prepare for what comes next. Consider how different your relationship with silence might become if you understood it not as absence, but as the source from which all presence emerges. The quiet moments before sleep, instead of being empty spaces to be filled with worry or entertainment, become opportunities to connect with the vast awareness that is your true nature. Tonight, as you prepare for rest, you can practice the villager's discovery. Instead of trying to fill the silence with thoughts or distractions, can you listen deeply to what the silence contains? Notice how your breath emerges from quietness and returns to quietness. Feel how your heartbeat pulses from the spacious stillness that surrounds it. The Buddha said, "Silence is not the absence of something, but the presence of everything." In learning to rest comfortably in silence, you connect with the source of all peace, the vast spaciousness that is always available beneath the noise of daily life. As you drift towards sleep, imagine yourself like the villagers, learning to hear the 10,000 subtle voices that arise from silence. Each sensation in your body, each gentle thought, each moment of awareness is like a sound arising from the infinite quiet that holds all experience. In resting in this silence, you discover that you are never alone, never disconnected from the source that continuously creates and sustains all life. As we learn to appreciate the fullness that exists within silence, we naturally begin to understand how our scattered attention prevents us from always receiving the peace that surrounds us. Let us now visit an ancient monastery where a brilliant young monk discovered that true mastery comes not from lighting many flames at once, but from offering our complete presence to just one. In the ancient monastery of Nalanda, where Buddhist scholarship flourished for over 1,000 years, there lived a young monk named Ananda who possessed an extraordinary mind. He could memorize entire sutras after hearing them just once, debate complex philosophical points with sophisticated ease, and analyze the subtlest meanings hidden within the Buddha's teachings. His teachers praised his intellectual gifts, and his fellow students looked up to him with a mixture of admiration and awe. But despite his remarkable abilities, Ananda struggled with a problem that frustrated him deeply. During meditation, his brilliant mind became his greatest obstacle. Instead of finding the peace and clarity that seemed to come naturally to other students, his thoughts raced from one insight to another, analyzing, comparing, and elaborating on everything he had learned. Where others found stillness, he found a constant storm of mental activity. "I understand the teachings perfectly," he confided to his closest friend, a gentle monk named Soma. "I can explain the Four Noble Truths, detail the steps of the Eightfold Path, and recite the precise conditions for enlightenment. But when I sit in meditation, my mind refuses to settle. It's as if my knowledge creates more noise, not less." Soma listened with the patient compassion that had made him beloved throughout the monastery. Though less intellectually gifted than Ananda, Soma possessed a quality of natural presence that allowed him to sink effortlessly into deep meditation. "Perhaps," he suggested gently, "you could speak with Master Nagaruna about this difficulty, Master." Nagaruna was the monastery's most revered teacher, known not only for his profound wisdom but for his ability to guide students through the most challenging obstacles to inner peace. When Ananda approached him with his problem, the old master listened without interruption, his eyes reflecting the kind of understanding that comes from decades of walking the spiritual path. "Show me how you practice meditation," Master Nagaruna said when Ananda finished explaining his struggle. Ananda assumed the proper posture and closed his eyes. Almost immediately, his teacher could see the young monk's face tighten with concentration. His breathing became controlled and deliberate. His whole being seemed to strain towards some goal that remained frustratingly out of reach. After a few minutes, the master gently touched Ananda's shoulder "Open your eyes," he said softly. "Tell me what happened." "The same thing that always happens," Ananda replied with evident frustration. "First I tried to focus on my breathing, but then I remembered a teaching about the impermanence of breath, which led me to think about the nature of the body, which reminded me of a debate we had yesterday about whether the body exists independently of consciousness, which made me wonder about the relationship between mind and matter. ... double quotes. He trailed off, recognizing the familiar pattern that had derailed his meditation once again. Master Nagaruna nodded thoughtfully. "Come with me to the meditation hall," he said. It was evening, and the great hall lay in darkness except for a few oil lamps that provided minimal light for late-night practice. The master led Ananda to a table where dozens of candles waited, along with flint and tinder for lighting them. "I want you to light all of these candles," the master instructed. "But you must light them all at exactly the same moment." Ananda looked confused, but began to comply. He lit one candle, then rushed to light another, then another, trying to work quickly so all the flames would appear simultaneously. But of course, by the time he reached the fourth or fifth candle, the first ones had been burning for several seconds. He tried different approaches, preparing all the wicks first, arranging the candles in strategic patterns, even attempting to light multiple candles from a single flame, but it proved impossible to achieve what his teacher had requested. After 20 minutes of increasingly frantic effort, Ananda stopped, perspiration beading his forehead despite the cool evening air. "Master, I cannot do it. It's impossible to light so many candles at exactly the same moment." "Try again," the teacher said patiently. "But this time, light only one candle and give it your complete attention." Ananda struck the flint, brought a small flame to the wick of a single candle, and watched as it caught and grew steady. The warm light spread gently through the darkness around them, creating a circle of soft illumination that seemed to expand naturally without effort. "Now," said Master Nagaruna, "look around you." To Ananda's surprise, the single candle's light revealed details throughout the hall that had been hidden in darkness. The intricate carvings on the pillars, the peaceful faces of Buddha statues, the worn stones of the floor where thousands of monks had walked in meditation over the centuries. One flame illuminated everything within its reach without strain or effort. "Your mind in meditation is like these candles," the master explained. "When you try to light many flames at once, focusing on your breath, while simultaneously analyzing teachings, monitoring your posture, evaluating your progress, and comparing your experience to what you think should happen, you create only chaos and frustration. But when you offer your complete attention to one simple object, like this single flame, that attention naturally illuminates everything else." Over the following weeks, Master Nagaruna guided Ananda in learning the practice of single-pointed concentration, what Buddhists call samadhi. Instead of trying to be aware of everything at once, Ananda learned to rest his entire attention on one simple object, sometimes the sensation of breathing, sometimes the flame of a single candle, sometimes the sound of a bell gradually fading into silence. At first, his intellectual mind resisted this simplicity. "Surely," it argued, "someone with my understanding should be practicing something more sophisticated, more worthy of my abilities." But gradually, as he persisted in offering his complete attention to one simple focus, something extraordinary began to happen. The single-pointed concentration began to reveal depths that all his intellectual analyses had never touched. When he rested his full attention on his breath, he discovered not just the physical sensation of air moving in and out of his body, but the entire web of conditions that made breathing possible, the plants that created oxygen, the atmosphere that held it, the miraculous coordination of muscles and organs that sustained life moment by moment. One simple focus opened into infinite appreciation. When he practiced with a candle flame, his concentrated attention revealed not just flickering light, but the dance of elements that created combustion, the way light and shadow played together. The profound symbolism of a small flame maintaining itself in darkness. Single-pointed focus became a doorway into the interconnectedness of all existence. Most remarkably, as his meditation deepened through this practice of one-pointed attention, his intellectual understanding also transformed. The teachings he had memorized began to reveal living meaning rather than abstract concepts. The philosophical debates that had once excited his competitive mind became opportunities for genuine inquiry and mutual discovery. "I spent years trying to grasp all the teachings at once," he told Soma one evening as they sat together watching the sunset. "I thought enlightenment meant accumulating as much knowledge as possible and holding it all in my awareness simultaneously. But it's the opposite. True understanding comes from bringing complete presence to one simple thing, and discovering that everything else is contained within that simplicity." Soma smiled, remembering his own struggles with meditation before learning to rest in the natural simplicity of present moment awareness. "Like the candle flame," he said softly, "one light illuminates the whole hall." Months later, when new students came to Master Nagaruna with complaints about their scattered, overactive minds, he would often assign them to practice with Ananda. The former intellectual prodigy had become one of the monastery's most skillful teachers of concentration, able to guide others toward the profound peace that emerges when attention gathers like light focusing through a lens. "The mind that tries to be everywhere ends up nowhere," Ananda would tell his students. "But the mind that rests completely in one place discovers that it has touched the center from which all places arise." The Buddha taught, "As a fletcher straightens an arrow shaft, even so the discerning man straightens his mind, which is fickle and unsteady, difficult to guard, difficult to hold back." This teaching points to one of the most fundamental principles in Buddhist meditation, the power of sustained, focused attention to transform not just our mental state, but our entire relationship with reality. Why do we struggle so much with scattered attention in our modern world? Buddhist psychology recognizes that the mind's natural tendency is to move constantly from object to object, seeking stimulation and avoiding boredom. This mental restlessness, what Buddhists call vitakka, is not a personal failing but a universal characteristic of untrained consciousness, like a muscle that has never been exercised. The mind's capacity for sustained attention must be gradually developed through patient practice. In our current culture, this challenge has become particularly acute. We are surrounded by technologies designed to fragment our attention, to keep us constantly switching between different streams of information and stimulation. The same mental patterns that make it difficult to focus on one task during the day naturally carry over into our efforts to find peace and rest. The practice of single-pointed concentration, samatha in Sanskrit, works by gradually training the mind to discover the deep satisfaction that comes from complete engagement with one simple object. Unlike the scattered pleasure-seeking that characterizes distracted consciousness, this concentrated attention reveals what Buddhists call piti and sukha, the joy and tranquility that naturally arise when the mind stops its restless searching and settles into stable presence. This settling is not a matter of forcing the mind to behave differently, but of providing it with an experience that is actually more satisfying than its habitual scattering. Like Ananda, discovering that one candle illuminates more than many scattered flames. We find that one pointed attention reveals depths of experience that scattered awareness can never access. The Japanese practice of zazen, just sitting, embodies this principle perfectly. Rather than trying to achieve multiple goals simultaneously, the practitioner offers complete attention to the simple act of sitting upright and breathing naturally. This apparently simple practice can reveal infinite depths when approached with the kind of wholehearted commitment that Ananda learned to bring to his single candle. In daily life, we can apply this teaching by experimenting with bringing complete attention to one activity at a time. Instead of eating while reading, walking while texting, or listening while planning our response, we can practice the radical act of doing one thing with our whole being. This single-pointed engagement transforms ordinary activities into opportunities for the same kind of illumination that Ananda found in his meditation practice. Tonight, as you prepare for sleep, you have an ideal opportunity to practice this ancient wisdom. Instead of letting your mind scatter across the day's events, tomorrow's responsibilities, and random thoughts and worries, can you offer your complete attention to one simple aspect of resting? Perhaps the feeling of your body settling into stillness, or the gentle rhythm of your natural breathing, or the simple awareness of being present in this moment. The Buddha said, whatever a monk keeps pursuing with his thinking and pondering, that becomes the inclination of his awareness. When we practice gathering our attention like light focusing through a lens, we discover that this concentration doesn't limit our awareness but deepens it immeasurably. As you drift toward sleep, imagine yourself like Ananda, learning to light one candle with complete attention. Let your mind settle naturally around one simple focus, trusting that this single point of concentrated presence contains everything you need for deep rest and peaceful dreams. In learning to be completely where you are, you discover that where you are is exactly where infinite peace has always been waiting. Our next story takes us to a riverside village where a wise woman taught her community the ancient art of letting sorrows flow naturally, like leaves carried by moving water toward the vast ocean of healing. In a valley where 3 rivers converged to form one great waterway, there stood a village called Shrepa that had prospered for generations from the fertile soil and abundant water. The people were hard-working and generally kind to one another. But like all human communities, they carried their share of sorrows. Old wounds from family conflicts, grief from losses, disappointments from unfulfilled dreams, and the daily accumulation of small hurts that seem inevitable in any life shared with others. Among the villagers lived an elderly woman named Kamala, who had come to Shrepa as a young bride 60 years earlier. Over the decades, she had raised 7 children, buried 2 of them, nursed her husband through a long illness before his death, and weathered more seasons of drought, flood, and hardship than anyone cared to count. Yet, despite all she had endured, Kamala possessed a quality of peace that drew people to her like travelers seeking shelter. Her small house near the riverbank had become an unofficial gathering place for anyone carrying troubles too heavy to bear alone. People would arrive at her door with tear-stained faces and hearts full of pain, and somehow, after sitting with Kamala for an hour or 2, they would leave feeling lighter, more able to face whatever challenges awaited them. The village headman, Rajesh, was among those who found solace in Kamala's presence. Despite his position of respect and relative prosperity, he carried a burden of guilt that had troubled him for 15 years. As a young father, he had spoken harsh words to his teenage son during an argument. Words that proved to be their last conversation before the boy left home and was killed in an accident in a distant city. The weight of those unfinished words had never left Rajesh's heart. One evening, unable to sleep once again due to the familiar torment of regret, Rajesh made his way to Kamala's house. He found her sitting on her porch, looking out at the river that flowed past her door with its constant, gentle murmur. "Kamalaji," he said, using the respectful term that acknowledged her as an elder and teacher. "I cannot continue carrying this pain. Every night I replay that last argument with my son. Every day I think of the words I should have spoken instead, the forgiveness I should have offered. How do you bear your own losses with such peace? What is the secret that allows some people to find lightness while others remain forever burdened?" Kamala gestured for him to sit beside her on the simple wooden bench she had placed facing the water. For several minutes, they listened together to the river's steady voice as it carried the water from the high mountains toward the distant sea. "Tell me, Rash," Kamala said, finally, "what do you see when you look at this river?" "I see water flowing toward the ocean," he replied, wondering what insight this observation might lead to. "And if I were to throw a handful of salt into the water, what would happen to it?" "It would dissolve and be carried away," Rajesh answered. "What if I threw in a flower, a piece of wood, even a heavy stone? The flower and wood would float downstream. The stone would sink to the bottom, but the river would continue flowing around and over it." Kamala nodded. "Now tell me, what would happen to this river if it tried to hold on to everything that entered it? What if it refused to let the salt dissolve, the flower float away, the stone settle and be covered by flowing water?" Rajesh was quiet for a moment, sensing the direction of her teaching. The river would become clogged. The water would stop flowing. Eventually, there would be no river at all, just a stagnant pond full of debris. "Exactly," Kamala said gently. "Our hearts are like this river. Life constantly brings us experiences, some sweet like flowers, some bitter like salt, some heavy like stones. The nature of a healthy heart is to let these experiences flow through it, to be touched by them without being stopped by them." She paused, watching a leaf drift past in the current. "Your son's death and your regret about your last conversation, these are like stones thrown into your heart's river. But instead of letting them settle on the bottom where the flowing water of life can gradually cover them with new experiences, new understanding, new opportunities for love, you keep picking them up and throwing them in again. Every night, you recreate the same wound." Rajesh felt tears gathering in his eyes as the truth of her words touched something deep within him. "But how can I just let go of something so important? Doesn't that mean I'm forgetting my son, dishonoring his memory?" "Come with me," Kamala said, rising from the bench and walking toward the water's edge. She picked up a smooth stone from the riverbank and held it in her palm. "This stone is beautiful, is it not? Feel its weight, its coolness, the way the water has polished its surface over countless years." Rajesh examined the stone, noting its pleasing shape and the subtle colors that seemed to shift in the moonlight. "Now," Kamala continued, "watch what happens when I release it to the river." She opened her hand and let the stone drop into the flowing water. With a soft splash, "Has the stone been destroyed? Has it ceased to exist?" "No," Rash replied. "It has simply returned to where it belongs. To be part of the river's flow, your love for your son is like this stone, precious, real, and eternal. But your guilt and regret are like trying to hold the stone above the water forever. They prevent the natural flow that would allow your love to find its proper place in the river of your heart." Over the following weeks, Kamala began teaching Rajesh and several other troubled villagers a practice she called feeding the river. Every evening at sunset, she would guide them down to the water's edge, where each person would bring some symbol of the sorrow they carried, a written note describing their regret, a flower representing someone they had lost, a stone embodying a burden they had carried too long. Speak to your sorrow, she would instruct them. Thank it for the love it represents, for caring so deeply about what matters to you. Then offer it to the river, not as a way of forgetting, but as a way of letting your love flow naturally instead of creating dams of pain. At first, Rajesh found it difficult to release his grip on the guilt that had become so familiar. If I stop feeling terrible about my last words to my son, he worried, won't that mean I don't care about what happened? Won't that make me a callous father? Tell me, Kamala replied, when you hold on to this guilt so tightly, does it create more love in your heart or less? Does it make you a more compassionate person, or does it keep you trapped in a painful past where you cannot help anyone, including yourself? As Rajesh honestly examined his experience, he realized that his constant self-punishment had indeed made him less available to others, less able to offer the kindness and wisdom that his years of living might have provided. His guilty preoccupation with past mistakes prevented him from being fully present to the people in his life who could still benefit from his care. Gradually, through the practice of symbolically offering his burdens to the flowing water, Rajesh began to experience a different relationship with his grief. Instead of guilt that paralyzed him with regret, he began to feel a flowing sadness that honored both his love for his son and his human imperfection. Instead of endless self-recrimination, he found space for the kind of compassionate understanding he would have offered any other parent facing similar tragedy. My son knew I loved him, he said to Kamala one evening after several months of practice. Our last conversation was difficult, but it was one conversation in 18 years of relationship. Why did I let that single moment eclipse all the tenderness we shared? Because, Kamala replied gently, you confused holding on to pain with holding on to love. But see how much more love you can feel now that you're not spending all your energy maintaining your guilt. See how much more present you can be to honor your son's memory through the kindness you show to others. As word spread about the healing power of Kamala's river practice, people began coming from other villages to learn her simple method for releasing burdens that had grown too heavy to carry. She never claimed any special powers or secret knowledge, always insisting that the river itself was the teacher. I have simply learned to cooperate with what water has always known, she would tell newcomers. Life flows. When we try to dam it up with our refusal to let difficult experiences move through us, we create stagnation and suffering. When we allow our hearts to flow like this river, touched by everything, holding on to nothing, we discover that we have infinite capacity for both joy and sorrow, both love and loss. One evening, as Rajesh sat by the water with several other regular practitioners, a young mother named Priya arrived carrying her infant son. Through tears, she explained that the baby had been born with a severe disability, and she was drowning in grief for the perfect child she had expected and would never have. Without hesitation, Rajesh rose and offered her his place on the bench beside Kamala. As he listened to the older woman gently guide this new mother through the same process of releasing expectations to the flowing water, he felt a deep gratitude for the path that had led him from paralyzing guilt to the ability to hold space for another's pain. Thank you, he whispered to the river, to his son's memory, to Kamala, and to the mysterious process that transforms suffering into compassion when we stop trying to control it and allow it to flow where it needs to go. The Buddha taught, hatred never ends through hatred. By non-hatred alone does it end. This is an eternal law. This teaching extends far beyond our relationships with others to include our relationship with our own pain, mistakes, and difficult experiences. When we meet our sorrows with the gentle understanding that Kamala embodied, they naturally transform into wisdom and compassion. Why do we find it so difficult to let our pain flow naturally instead of holding on to it? Buddhist psychology points to our deep confusion between love and attachment, between caring and clinging. We believe that if we stop suffering about someone or something we've lost, we're somehow betraying our love or diminishing its importance. But as Rajesh discovered, the opposite is true. Holding on to pain actually limits our capacity for love by keeping our hearts contracted around old wounds instead of open to present possibilities. The image of the river in this story represents what Buddhists call the natural flow of impermanence, anicca. Everything that enters our experience, joy, sorrow, success, failure, connection, loss, is meant to flow through us, not to be permanently grasped or rejected. When we understand this flow as natural and beneficial rather than threatening, we can participate in it consciously instead of being overwhelmed by it. In Buddhist meditation, there is a practice called noting that embodies the same wisdom Kamala taught by the river. When difficult emotions or thoughts arise during meditation, instead of fighting them or being consumed by them, practitioners learn to acknowledge them gently: sadness, worry, anger, and then let them pass, like clouds moving across the sky of awareness. This doesn't mean becoming indifferent to pain or loss. Kamala didn't teach people to stop caring about their loved ones or to pretend their difficulties didn't matter. Instead, she showed them how to transform the static grip of unchanging pain into the flowing movement of love that can adapt to any circumstances. The practice of feeding the river can be adapted to any situation where we find ourselves holding on to experiences that need to flow. Perhaps it's resentment towards someone who hurt us, disappointment about opportunities that didn't materialize, or anxiety about future uncertainties. By symbolically offering these burdens to the flow of life, whether through the image of a river, the movement of breath, or simply the passage of time, we cooperate with the natural healing process instead of working against it. Tonight, as you prepare for rest, notice if there are any sorrows or worries you've been holding on to too tightly. Can you imagine offering them to the natural flow of your breath, letting each exhale carry away what no longer serves you? This doesn't mean abandoning what you care about, but rather letting your caring take the flowing form of compassion instead of the static form of clinging. The Buddha said, "Thousands of candles can be lighted from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened." Happiness never decreases by being shared. Similarly, when we let our love flow freely instead of trying to possess or control our experiences, we discover that our capacity for both joy and peace increases rather than diminishes. As you drift towards sleep, imagine yourself by Kamala's river, feeling the gentle support of flowing water beneath your concerns. Trust that your heart, like the river, knows how to carry whatever life brings without becoming clogged or stagnant. In learning to cooperate with this natural flow, you discover that rest comes not from resolving all your difficulties, but from allowing them to move through your awareness with the same effortless grace that water finds its way to the sea. In the hills where medicinal herbs grow slowly toward their perfect flowering, an elderly monk learned that the most precious transformations require not our impatience, but our trust in processes that unfold in their own sacred rhythm. In the hills outside the ancient city of Rajia, where the Buddha himself once walked and taught. There lived a monk named Tenzin, who had devoted his life to growing medicinal herbs for the monastery's healing practice. For 30 years, he had tended his garden with meticulous care, studying the properties of each plant, learning the optimal conditions for growth, and providing remedies that had helped countless people find relief from physical and mental suffering. Tenzin took deep pride in his work and had developed a reputation for being able to coax life from even the most difficult seeds. His garden was renowned throughout the region for producing the strongest ginger for digestive ailments, the most potent turmeric for inflammation, and the gentlest chamomile for troubled sleep. Visitors would travel many miles just to see the orderly rows of thriving plants that testified to his skill and dedication. But as Tenzin entered his 60th year, he began to feel a restless dissatisfaction with his achievements. "I have mastered the cultivation of common herbs," he confided to his friend Lobsang, another elderly monk who tended the monastery's library. "But I long to grow something truly extraordinary. Something that would be my legacy, a gift of healing unlike anything this garden has ever produced." That winter, a traveling merchant arrived at the monastery carrying rare seeds from distant lands. Among his precious cargo were 3 seeds unlike any Tenzin had ever encountered. They were deep blue-black in color, almost perfectly round, and felt surprisingly heavy in his palm despite their small size. "These come from the highest mountains of Tibet," the merchant explained, his eyes gleaming with the excitement of someone sharing a treasured secret. "The plant they produce is legendary. Its flowers are said to glow with inner light, and tea made from its petals can heal not just the body, but the deepest wounds of the heart. But I must warn you," he added solemnly, "these seeds are extraordinarily difficult to grow. Many experienced gardeners have tried and failed. Some say they require not just the right soil and climate, but also perfect patience and unwavering faith." Despite the warning, or perhaps because of it, Tenzin's heart leaped with excitement. Here was the extraordinary challenge he had been seeking, the opportunity to create something truly magnificent. He purchased the 3 precious seeds immediately, already envisioning the miraculous healing garden he would cultivate. With great ceremony, Tenzin prepared a special section of his garden for the rare seeds. He enriched the soil with the finest compost, positioned them to receive optimal sunlight, and protected them with a beautiful bamboo shelter he constructed himself. He whispered prayers over them each morning and evening, offering them the most devoted attention he had ever given to any living things. Spring came, and Tenzin's regular herbs sprouted predictably, the basil emerging within days, the mint spreading eagerly, the calendula painting bright patches of orange throughout the garden. But the special seeds remained dormant, showing no signs of life despite his careful management. Perhaps they need more water, Tenzin thought, increasing their irrigation. When that produced no results, he tried different soil amendments, adjusted their exposure to sun and shade, and even consulted ancient texts about rare plant cultivation. Still, nothing emerged from the dark earth where his precious seeds lay hidden. As weeks turned to months, Tenzin's initial excitement began to transform into anxiety. What if I planted them incorrectly? He worried. What if the soil isn't suitable? What if they were damaged during their long journey? He found himself checking the special bed multiple times each day, searching desperately for any hint of green growth. His friend Lobsang noticed Tenzin's increasing agitation during their evening walks. "How are your special seeds progressing?" he asked one sunset. "They're not progressing at all," Tenzin replied with obvious frustration. "Every other plant in the garden is thriving, but these expensive, supposedly magical seeds show no signs of life. I'm beginning to think the merchant deceived me, perhaps. They're not viable at all." Lobsang listened thoughtfully to his friend's concerns. As the monastery's librarian, he had spent decades studying not just texts about Dharma, but also agricultural treatises and botanical wisdom from across Asia. "Tell me," he said gently, "what did the merchants say about these seeds? That they were difficult to grow, that they required patience and faith," Tenzin replied. "But I have been patient. I've given them 3 months of perfect care." 3 months, Lobsang repeated softly. "And how long does it take for your ginger to mature?" "About 10 months from planting to harvest," Tenzin answered, beginning to sense where his friend's questions were leading. "And your turmeric?" "Nearly a full year." "Then why?" Lobsang asked with gentle humor. "Do you expect seeds described as extraordinarily difficult, coming from the highest and most challenging mountains, to sprout in the same time frame as common herbs? Perhaps their patience requirements are measured not in months, but in seasons or even years." That night, Tenzin lay awake, reconsidering his expectations. Had he allowed his eagerness for quick results to blind him to the different rhythm these special seeds might require? The next morning, instead of checking anxiously for signs of sprouting, he simply watered the bed normally and whispered a prayer of trust rather than urgency. Summer passed with no visible change in the special bed, but Tenzin found his relationship with the hidden seeds beginning to transform. Instead of feeling frustrated by their apparent inactivity, he began to appreciate the mystery of their underground life. What profound processes might be occurring beneath the soil? He wondered. What kind of root system might be developing in the darkness, preparing to support an extraordinary flowering? As autumn arrived, Tenzin overheard 2 young monks complaining about their meditation practice. "I have been sitting every day for 6 months," one said with obvious disappointment. "But I feel no different than when I started. When will I experience the peace and clarity that everyone talks about?" Listening to their conversation, Tenzin suddenly understood something profound about his own impatience with the seeds. Both he and the young monks were measuring the value of their practice by immediate, visible results, instead of trusting the slower, deeper processes that true transformation requires. That evening, he visited the special bed and spoke aloud to the hidden seeds for the first time since spring. "Forgive me for pressuring you to grow according to my timeline," he said softly. "I understand now that you have your own perfect rhythm, your own necessary seasons of development that I cannot hurry. I will tend you faithfully, not because I expect quick results, but because caring for you has already begun to teach me something valuable about patience and faith." Winter came and went, then another spring, summer, and autumn. Tenzin continued his daily care of the entire garden, including the special bed, but his relationship with the hidden seeds had completely transformed. Instead of source of frustration, they had become his teachers in a different kind of cultivation, the patient nurturing of possibilities, whose timing could not be controlled or predicted. Other monks began to notice a change in Tenzin himself. His usual intensity had softened into a deeper kind of presence. His gardening work, while still skillful, had taken on a more meditative quality. When young monks came to him with questions about their practice, he would often lead them to the special bed and share what the hidden seeds had taught him about divine timing and unforced development. Some of our most important growth happens in darkness, in ways we cannot see or measure, he would tell them. The seed knows when conditions are right for sprouting, just as your heart knows when you're ready for the next level of understanding. Our job is not to force the process, but to create the conditions for growth and then trust the wisdom of natural timing. On a morning in late spring of the third year, Tenzin made his usual round of the garden, watering and observing each section with the relaxed attention that had replaced his former anxiety. When he approached the special bed, he stopped in amazement. 3 tiny green shoots had emerged overnight, so small they were barely visible unless one looked directly at them. His first impulse was excitement, but immediately he felt something deeper, a profound gratitude for the long teaching the seeds had provided through their patient underground growth. These shoots represented not just the beginning of the legendary plants, but the fruit of his own cultivation of faith and acceptance of processes beyond his control. Over the following months, the plants grew with extraordinary vigor, as if all their years of root development had prepared them for rapid above-ground expansion. By autumn, they had produced the luminous flowers the merchant had described, blossoms that seemed to hold light even in the evening shadows, radiating a subtle fragrance that calmed everyone who encountered it. But for Tenzin, the real miracle was not in the flowers themselves, but in what the long wait had cultivated within him. The tea brewed from the petals did indeed seem to possess healing properties that went beyond the physical. But Tenzin recognized that his own capacity for patient presence had been equally transformed by the years of tending invisible growth. The seeds were always growing, he told Lobsang, as they admired the glowing blossoms together. I just couldn't see it happening. They were developing the root system strong enough to support such extraordinary flowering. Now I understand that the most important growth in my own life has followed the same pattern. Long periods of patient development that I couldn't observe, followed by apparent sudden breakthroughs that were actually the natural result of invisible preparation. Years later, when visitors came to see the famous luminous flowers, Tenzin would always share the story of the 3 years of waiting. These plants teach us that there is no such thing as wasted time in genuine cultivation, he would explain. Every moment of patient care, even when we cannot see results, is contributing to the conditions that allow extraordinary beauty to emerge in its own perfect timing. The Buddha taught, "A jug fills drop by drop." This simple observation contains profound wisdom about the nature of authentic development. Whether we're speaking of plants growing in soil, skills developing through practice, or wisdom ripening in the human heart, the most meaningful transformations rarely happen according to our preferred timeline, but rather unfold according to natural rhythms that cannot be forced or rushed. Why do we struggle so much with processes that require extended time and invisible development? Buddhist understanding points to our cultural conditioning around instant gratification and visible progress. We have been trained to expect rapid results from our efforts, and when we don't see immediate evidence of growth, we often conclude that nothing is happening or that we're doing something wrong. This impatience extends particularly to our spiritual and personal development. We may meditate for a few weeks and wonder why we don't feel enlightened. We practice mindfulness for a month and become discouraged when we still experience stress and reactivity. We work on changing harmful patterns for a season and give up when the old habits reassert themselves. Like Tenzin with his seeds, we may be measuring success by the wrong timeline. The Japanese concept of kasan embodies the wisdom that Tenzin seeds taught him. Kasan means gradual, continuous improvement through small, consistent efforts over extended periods, instead of dramatic breakthroughs achieved through intense bursts of effort. Kasan recognizes that sustainable change happens through patient daily practice that accumulates almost imperceptibly until it reaches a tipping point where transformation becomes visible. In Buddhist meditation, this principle is called ripening, the gradual maturation of insight and compassion through sustained practice, even when we cannot see immediate results. Advanced practitioners often describe years of seemingly uneventful sitting meditation that suddenly blossomed into profound understanding. Much like Tenzin seeds that appeared dormant for 3 years before revealing their extraordinary nature. The story also illustrates the difference between forcing and allowing in any growth process. Tenzin's initial anxiety and constant checking actually interfered with his ability to provide the kind of stable, patient care that the seeds required. When he learned to trust their natural timing and focus on consistent, loving attention rather than visible results, he created the optimal conditions for their eventual flowering. This principle applies directly to the process of finding rest and peace. When we lie in bed anxiously monitoring whether we're relaxing correctly or falling asleep, according to our preferred schedule, our very concern about the process often prevents it from unfolding naturally, like seeds that grow best when tended consistently but not obsessively observed. Our capacity for deep rest develops most readily when we provide good conditions, a comfortable environment, relaxed breathing, gentle attention, and then trust our body's natural wisdom about timing. Tonight, as you prepare for sleep, you can embody the patience that Tenzin learned from his seeds. Instead of demanding that relaxation happen immediately, can you appreciate the invisible processes already occurring in your body, the gradual slowing of your heart rate, the subtle release of muscle tension, the natural preparation for rest that happens beneath the level of conscious awareness? The Buddha said, "Do not believe in anything simply because you have heard it. But after observation and analysis, when you find that anything agrees with reason and is conducive to the good and benefit of one and all, then accept it and live up to it." The seeds taught Tenzin to trust what he could not see, but could reasonably expect based on natural principles that consistent care and appropriate conditions would eventually yield the growth that was naturally inherent in viable seeds. As you settle into rest, imagine yourself like Tenzin in his transformed relationship with his garden, providing patient care without demanding immediate results, trusting in processes that unfold according to their own perfect timing. In learning to cooperate with natural rhythms rather than forcing artificial schedules, you discover that the most profound rest comes not from making sleep happen, but from creating the conditions where sleep can naturally emerge from the deep wisdom of your body and mind working in harmony. Let us now travel to a mountain lake where a skilled fisherman discovered that empty nets could hold more treasure than any catch his hands had ever pulled from the water. On the shores of a vast lake surrounded by mountains in ancient Kashmir, there lived a fisherman named Dorje, who had learned his craft from his father and grandfather before him. For 40 years, he had cast his nets into the clear waters each morning, providing fish for his family and selling the surplus at the village market. His skill was renowned throughout the region. He seemed to possess an intuitive understanding of where fish would be found, what times of day they fed most actively, and which techniques would yield the most abundant catch. But as Dorje entered his 60th year, something began to change. Despite using the same methods that had served him faithfully for decades, despite fishing in the same productive spots at the same optimal times, his nets began coming up empty. Day after day, he would return home with nothing to show for his efforts, his boat as empty as when he had set out before dawn. At first, Dorje assumed this was a temporary change in the lake's conditions, perhaps seasonal variations in water temperature, or natural fluctuations in fish populations would soon restore his accustomed success. He tried different areas of the lake, experimented with various baits, and adjusted his timing based on weather patterns. But weeks passed, then months, and still his nets remained empty. The practical implications of his sudden loss of skill began to weigh heavily on Dorje's mind. His savings, modest to begin with, dwindled quickly without the income from regular fish sales. His wife Pema, who had never questioned their security during 4 decades of successful fishing, now watched their food stores diminish with growing concern. "Perhaps it's time to consider a different livelihood," she suggested gently one evening as they shared a simple meal of rice and vegetables. No fish graced their table anymore. "Your cousin Norbu has offered you work helping with his barley harvest. It wouldn't pay as well as fishing, but it would provide steady income." Dorje knew his wife's suggestion was practical and loving, but something deep within him resisted abandoning the profession that had defined his identity for so long. "Give me a few more weeks," he asked. "I cannot believe that fish have simply vanished from these waters. There must be something I'm missing, some change in approach that will restore my ability to provide for us." But as more empty-handed days accumulated, Dorje's confidence began to crumble. The other fishermen in the village, many of whom had once sought his advice about successful techniques, now avoided his eyes when they returned each afternoon with nets full of silver fish. His reputation, built over decades of consistent skill, seemed to evaporate as quickly as morning mist on the lake's surface. What kind of fisherman catches no fish? He asked himself bitterly as he sat in his boat one morning, staring at nets that hung empty in the clear water. What purpose does a man serve if he cannot do the one thing he has always done well? The weight of failure and uselessness settled over Dorje like a heavy blanket, making even the simple act of casting his nets feel pointless. Some mornings, he would row to the middle of the lake and sit motionless for hours, overwhelmed by a despair that went deeper than practical concerns about money or food. One such morning, as Dorje drifted aimlessly in his empty boat, feeling more dejected than he had ever felt in his life, he noticed an elderly monk sitting on a large rock at the lake's edge. The monk appeared to be in deep meditation, so still that he seemed to be part of the landscape itself. Something about his presence drew Dorje to row closer to shore. As his boat approached the rocky outcrop, the monk opened his eyes and smiled with the kind of warmth that suggests recognition of shared humanity rather than personal acquaintance. "Beautiful morning," the monk observed, his voice carrying the gentle authority of someone who had found peace with life's constant changes. "Beautiful for some, perhaps," Dorje replied, gesturing at his empty nets with obvious bitterness. "I am Dorje, and I have been a fisherman on this lake for 40 years. But for months now, I catch nothing. My nets come up as empty as my heart feels." The monk studied Dorje's face with compassionate attention. "I am Rinchen," he said simply, "and I would be honored if you would share with me what it feels like to spend hours on this magnificent lake, even when the fish are not cooperating." Dorje was surprised by the question. No one had asked him to describe his experience of being on the lake. Everyone only wanted to know about his catch, or lack thereof. For a moment, he sat quietly, considering what it actually felt like to be surrounded by the mountain-ringed waters each day. "Well," he said slowly, "the sunrise over the eastern peaks is extraordinary. The water changes color throughout the day. Silver in early morning, deep blue by midday, golden in the late afternoon. Sometimes eagles soar overhead, and their shadows pass across the surface like dark blessings. The sound of gentle waves against the boat is peaceful, I suppose, when I'm not worrying about empty nets." As Dorje spoke, something shifted in his awareness. He realized that he had been so focused on the absence of fish that he had stopped noticing the presence of everything else that surrounded him during his daily hours on the lake. "What else do you experience out there?" Rinchen encouraged gently. Dorje found himself describing the way morning mist rose from the water like ascending prayers, how the play of light and shadow on the lake's surface created constantly changing patterns of beauty, how the rhythm of rowing had always brought his mind into a meditative state that he associated with contentment and belonging. "It sounds," the monk observed, "as though you spend your days in one of the most beautiful temples in the world, surrounded by teachings that speak directly to the heart. And yet you tell me you feel empty and purposeless because fish do not fill your nets." The words struck Dorje like a gentle shock of recognition. He had indeed been experiencing extraordinary beauty and peace during his months of failed fishing. But his preoccupation with results had prevented him from receiving these gifts. "But how can I support my family with beautiful sunrises and peaceful rowing?" Dorje protested, though he could hear that his tone had already begun to soften. Rinchen smiled. "A fair question. Tell me, during all your years of successful fishing, did you ever experience the lake as fully as you have described it to me today?" Dorje considered this honestly. "No," he admitted. "When my nets were full, I was always thinking about the market, calculating profits, planning the next day's fishing. I was so busy being a successful fisherman that I hardly noticed I was living in paradise." "Then perhaps," the monk suggested, "these empty nets are not a punishment or failure, but a gift that allows you to receive what has always been freely offered but which you were too busy to accept." Over the following weeks, Dorje began to approach his daily fishing differently. While he still cast his nets and hoped for fish, he no longer measured the value of each day solely by his catch. Instead, he began to cultivate the capacity to receive the constant abundance that surrounded him, the ever-changing beauty of light on water, the meditation of rhythmic rowing, the profound peace of floating between mountain and sky. To his surprise, this shift in attention began to transform not just his experience of fishing, but his entire relationship with life. When he returned home each evening, even with empty nets, he had stories to share with Pema about the day's particular beauty: an osprey diving for fish, clouds reflected perfectly in still water, the way afternoon lights turned the surrounding peaks to gold. "You seem different," Pema observed one evening after. Dorje had spent 20 minutes describing a spectacular sunset he had witnessed from the center of the lake. "Lighter somehow, despite our financial concerns. What has changed?" "I'm learning to be a fisherman even when I catch no fish," Dorje replied, surprising himself with how true this felt. "The lake offers so much more than what can be captured in nets. I had forgotten that my happiness never actually came from the fish themselves, but from the peace I found in being present with the water, the sky, the mountains. That peace is still available, whether my nets are full or empty." As winter approached, Dorje did begin helping Norbu with various farming tasks, bringing in enough income to meet their basic needs. But he continued his daily fishing expeditions, understanding now that their purpose transcended the practical goal of catching fish. He had discovered what it meant to engage in an activity for its own intrinsic value rather than only for external results. Then, on a crystalline morning in early spring, after nearly a year of empty nets, Dorje felt a familiar weight as he pulled in his catch. 3 large fish gleamed silver in the morning sun, the first he had caught in almost 12 months. But instead of elation or relief, he felt a gentle gratitude that encompassed both the fish and the months of fishless. mornings that had taught him a deeper kind of abundance. "Thank you," he whispered to the fish, to the lake, to the empty nets that had become full again, and to the mysterious process that had used apparent failure to teach him the difference between having and being, between success and contentment. When he returned to shore, Rinchen was again sitting on his rock, as if he had been waiting for this moment. "Congratulations on your beautiful catch," the monk said with genuine pleasure. "Thank you," Dorje replied, "but the real catch happened during all those months of empty nets. I learned that a fisherman's true work is not capturing fish, but cultivating the presence and patience that allows him to receive whatever the lake offers, including the gift of apparent emptiness." Rinchen nodded approvingly. "Now you understand what it means to fish without attachment to fishing, to succeed without dependence on success. Whether your nets are full or empty, you remain full of awareness, of appreciation, of connection to the abundant life that surrounds us always. The Buddha taught, contentment is natural wealth. Luxury is artificial poverty. This profound teaching illuminates the difference between the abundance that depends on external circumstances and the richness that arises from our capacity to receive life fully, regardless of whether it conforms to our preferences or expectations. Why do we so readily mistake having for being, success for contentment? Buddhist psychology points to our fundamental confusion about the source of satisfaction. We believe that fulfillment comes from acquiring what we want, rather than from appreciating what is already present. This confusion creates a cycle of constant seeking that prevents us from recognizing the abundance available in each moment. Dorje's story illustrates what Buddhist teachings call the poverty of riches, the way that attachment to external results can blind us to the wealth of experience that is always freely available. During his years of successful fishing, he was rich in fish but poor in presence, accumulating external goods while missing the internal richness that surrounded him daily. The empty nets represent what Buddhism calls noble failure, apparent setbacks that actually serve our deepest development by forcing us to discover sources of fulfillment that cannot be taken away by changing circumstances. When our usual methods of finding security and identity are disrupted, we have the opportunity to discover more fundamental sources of well-being. This teaching has particular relevance in our achievement-oriented culture, where self-worth is often measured by external accomplishments and material accumulation. Like Dorje before his transformation, many people spend years successfully pursuing goals while missing the intrinsic satisfaction available in the process of living itself. The monk Rinchen's questions guide Dorje toward what Buddhism calls process orientation rather than outcome orientation, instead of valuing his fishing only for its results. Dorje learns to appreciate the activity itself, the meditative quality of rowing, the beauty of being present with nature, the cultivation of patience and awareness that fishing requires. This shift from outcome to process doesn't mean abandoning practical goals or becoming indifferent to results. Dorje continued to cast his nets and was genuinely pleased when fish eventually returned. But his happiness and sense of purpose were no longer dependent on external success. He had found what Zen Buddhism calls purposeless purpose, engagement that is fulfilling in itself rather than merely a means to an end. In meditation practice, students often experience a similar frustration when they don't achieve the peaceful states they expect or hope for. Like Dorje with his empty nets, they may conclude that their practice is failing because it's not producing desired results. but experienced teachers know that some of the most valuable learning happens during periods of apparent struggle or lack of progress. The capacity to find fulfillment independent of external circumstances is what Buddhist teachings call unconditional contentment. This doesn't mean passive resignation or lack of appropriate effort, but rather a fundamental satisfaction with the process of living that doesn't depend on particular outcomes. Tonight, as you prepare for rest, you can practice Dorje's discovery. Instead of measuring the value of this time by whether you fall asleep quickly or achieve perfect relaxation, can you appreciate the intrinsic gift of simply being present with whatever arises? The feeling of your body settling, the rhythm of your breath, the gradual transition from day into night. These experiences have their own value independent of whether they lead to immediate sleep. The Buddha said, "Peace comes from within. Do not seek it without." Dorje discovered that the peace he had always sought through successful fishing was actually available in the simple act of being present with the lake, regardless of what his nets contained. Similarly, the rest you seek may be found not in achieving a particular state, but in relaxing into the natural process of being exactly where you are. As you settle into this moment, imagine yourself like Dorje, floating peacefully on the clear mountain lake, surrounded by beauty that asks nothing of you except your presence. Whether sleep comes quickly or slowly, whether your mind is busy or quiet, you are held by the same abundant awareness that surrounds every experience with perfect adequacy. Our next teaching comes from a sacred mountain where 5 pilgrims learned that the same peak could appear completely different depending on the inner state from which they viewed it, revealing profound truths about the nature of perception itself. High in the Himalayas, where the air grows thin and the sky touches the earth, stands a sacred mountain called Kailash Parvat. For countless generations, pilgrims have journeyed from distant lands to walk the ancient paths that circle this holy peak, believing that completing the circumambulation would purify their karma and bring them closer to enlightenment. Among these pilgrims, there once came 5 travelers who had met by chance at a monastery in the valley below. Though they came from different regions and backgrounds, they had decided to make the sacred journey together, finding companionship and safety in numbers as they faced the challenging high-altitude trek. The first traveler was Tenzin, a young monk from Tibet whose monastery had sent him on this pilgrimage as part of his spiritual training. He approached the mountain with reverence and excitement, seeing it as a manifestation of divine presence that would bless his meditation practice and deepen his understanding of the Dharma. The second was Priya, a middle-aged woman from India whose only child had died in an accident the previous year. She came to the mountain carrying profound grief, hoping that the sacred journey would help heal her shattered heart and provide some meaning for her overwhelming loss. The third traveler was James, a businessman from America who had become successful in his career, but felt increasingly empty and disconnected from any deeper purpose. He had read about the mountain's reputation for spiritual transformation and hoped the pilgrimage would help him discover what was missing from his materially comfortable but spiritually barren life. The fourth was Pemba, an elderly Sherpa guide who had circled the mountain dozens of times in his profession of leading pilgrims, but who now made this journey for personal reasons, sensing that his advancing age made this perhaps his final opportunity to approach the mountain not as a guide but as a seeker. The fifth was Sarah, a young artist from Europe who had been struggling with severe depression and creative block. She came to the mountain as a last resort, hoping that the combination of physical challenge and spiritual environment might break through the psychological darkness that had enveloped her life. On their first morning together, As they stood at the traditional starting point of the circumambulation, each pilgrim gazed up at the towering peak that rose before them into the clear blue sky. Though they were looking at exactly the same mountain, from exactly the same location, each saw something entirely different. Tenzin saw a magnificent mandala made of stone and ice, its perfect symmetry reflecting the cosmic order that underlies all existence. The mountain's pyramidal shape reminded him of the stupas in his monastery, and its snow-covered summit seemed to glow with inner light, confirming everything he had learned about the sacred nature of this place. Priya saw a massive grave marker, a monument to impermanence that somehow contained her son's spirit along with the spirits of all beings who had ever lived and died. The mountain's imposing presence made her feel small and fragile, reminding her of human mortality while simultaneously suggesting that something eternal might transcend individual loss. James saw an impressive natural structure that commanded respect, like a corporate headquarters rising above surrounding buildings. The mountain's dominance over the landscape appealed to his competitive instincts, and he approached it as a challenge to be conquered, a test that would prove his determination and perhaps provide the sense of achievement that seemed to elude him in his business success. Pemba saw an old friend whose moods and expressions he had learned to read over decades of intimate relationship. The mountain's current face, sharp and clear in the morning light, promised good weather for their journey, though he noticed subtle cloud formations that suggested conditions might change by afternoon. Sarah saw a massive impediment blocking out the sky, its overwhelming bulk triggering the same sense of hopelessness that had characterized her depression. The mountain seemed impossibly large and forbidding, making her question whether she possessed the strength or worthiness to complete the journey she had traveled so far to begin. As they began walking the ancient path that would take them around the mountain's base over the course of 3 days, their different perceptions of the peak continued to influence their experience of the pilgrimage. Tenzin moved with joyful reverence, frequently stopping to make prostrations and offer prayers at the various shrines they encountered. Priya walked in contemplative silence, tears often streaming down her face as she carried her grief through the sacred landscape. James approached the trek with the same strategic mindset he brought to business challenges, carefully managing his pace, monitoring his physical condition, and setting intermediate goals for each day's progress. Pemba moved with the easy rhythm of someone completely comfortable in high-altitude terrain, often pointing out details of the landscape that the others missed. Sarah struggled with each step, feeling overwhelmed by both the physical demands and the emotional intensity of the journey. On their second day, as they reached the highest point of the circumambulation path, something remarkable happened. The weather suddenly changed, bringing dense clouds that completely obscured their view of the mountain they had been circling. For several hours, they walked through thick mist that limited visibility to just a few feet ahead, forced to focus entirely on the immediate ground beneath their feet rather than the distant peak that had dominated their awareness since the journey began. When the clouds finally cleared in the late afternoon, revealing the mountain from their new vantage point on its far side, each pilgrim experienced a moment of disorientation. The peak they now viewed looked completely different from the mountain they had seen 2 days earlier. The angle of light, the perspective, the surrounding ridges all combined to create what seemed like an entirely different landmark. "Is that the same mountain?" Sarah asked, voicing the confusion they all felt. Pemba, whose long experience had prepared him for this moment, smiled gently. "It is the same mountain we have been walking around for 2 days, he confirmed. "But we are seeing it from the opposite side now." The mountain has not changed. Our position relative to it has changed. As the group contemplated this obvious yet somehow surprising truth, James was the first to articulate what they were all beginning to recognize. If the mountain looks so different just from changing our physical position, he said slowly, then what we saw on the first day, what we each thought was the real mountain, was just one limited perspective, wasn't it? That evening, as they camped beneath the stars with the mountain's night silhouette looming above them, the 5 pilgrims found themselves sharing more openly than they had before. Tenzin admitted that his initial reverent joy had been mixed with spiritual pride, a subtle competitiveness about being the most devout member of their group. Priya recognized that her grief, while genuine, had colored her perception of everything around her, making even sacred beauty appear tragic and final. James acknowledged that his impulse to conquer the mountain had prevented him from receiving the gifts it offered freely. The profound silence, the vast perspectives, the humbling reminder of human scale within the cosmos. Sarah realized that her depression had created a filter through which even potentially healing experiences appeared hopeless and overwhelming. And Pemba, who had initially felt superior in his familiarity with the mountain, recognized that his professional relationship with the peak had in some ways prevented him from encountering it with the fresh wonder that first-time pilgrims could experience. "We have been walking around the same mountain for 3 days," Priya observed. "But each of us has been on a completely different journey, seeing a completely different landscape, having a completely different experience. How is that possible?" Pemba considered her question carefully before responding. "The mountain is vast enough to contain all of our perspectives without being limited by any of them," he said finally. "It can simultaneously be sacred and tragic, challenging and beautiful, familiar and mysterious. Our individual views are not wrong, they are just partial. The mountain's true nature includes everything we have seen and infinitely more than any of us could see alone on their final day." As they completed the circumambulation and returned to their starting point, each pilgrim looked up at the mountain once more. But now, instead of seeing only their initial limited perspective, they carried with them the memory of all the different faces the mountain had shown them during their journey. The peak appeared richer, more complex, and somehow more real because of the multiple viewpoints they had gained by walking around it. "I feel like we have been introduced to the mountain properly now," Tenzin said. "Not just seeing one face of it, but appreciating its full presence." Sarah, who had struggled so intensely on the first day, found herself feeling unexpectedly grateful for the mountain's overwhelming presence. "It was big enough to hold all of my despair without being diminished by it," she reflected. "And somehow, that gives me hope that life itself might be large enough to contain depression without being defined by it." As they prepared to part ways and return to their separate lives, the 5 pilgrims realized that their shared journey had taught them something that extended far beyond their experience of the mountain. They had discovered how profoundly their mental and emotional state influenced their perception of reality, and how much richer and more accurate their understanding became when they could integrate multiple perspectives, rather than insisting that their limited viewpoint represented the whole truth. The Buddha taught, "We see the world not as it is, but as we are." This profound insight illuminates one of the most fundamental principles of Buddhist psychology, that our perception of reality is always filtered through the conditioning of our minds, the state of our emotions, and the limitations of our particular viewpoint. Why do we so readily assume that our perspective represents objective reality rather than recognizing it as one partial view among many possibilities? Buddhist understanding points to what is called naive realism, the unconscious belief that we perceive things directly as they actually are, rather than through the complex filtering system of our sensory organs, mental categories, and emotional states. This filtering process operates continuously, though we're rarely aware of it. Like the pilgrims seeing different mountains based on their internal conditions, we see different worlds based on our mood, our expectations, our past experiences, and our current concerns. When we're depressed, even beautiful landscapes appear grey and meaningless. When we're anxious, even safe situations seem threatening. When we're angry, even neutral comments feel like attacks. The mountain in this story represents what Buddhism calls the true nature of phenomena, the way things actually exist beyond our projections and interpretations. This true nature is vast enough to accommodate all our different perspectives without being limited by any of them. A mountain can simultaneously be sacred and challenging, beautiful and dangerous, familiar and mysterious, depending on who is looking at it and from what inner state they're viewing it. The pilgrimage around the mountain illustrates the Buddhist practice of circumambulating our experience, approaching life's challenges and experiences from multiple angles rather than getting trapped in a single perspective. When we're stuck in suffering, we often believe that our current view of the situation represents the complete reality. But like the pilgrims walking around the mountain, we can learn to shift our position and discover aspects of our experience that were invisible from our initial vantage point. This doesn't mean that all perspectives are equally accurate or useful, but rather that any single perspective, no matter how valid, captures only part of a larger truth. Sarah's depression gave her genuine insight into suffering and vulnerability. James's competitive approach provided real understanding of determination and goal achievement. Priya's grief opened her to profound truth about impermanence and love. Each viewpoint contained valuable, partial truth, but none represented the whole picture. In meditation practice, students often discover this principle directly. A situation that seemed completely hopeless from one mental state appears manageable, or even opportunities for growth when approached from a different inner condition. The external circumstances haven't changed, but the shift in internal perspective reveals previously hidden aspects of the experience. The clearing of the clouds in the story represents moments of insight that temporarily dissolve our habitual ways of seeing and allow us to perceive more clearly. These moments often reveal that what we thought was solid and permanent, our problems, our identity, our understanding of how things are, is actually much more fluid and open to change than we realized. Tonight, as you rest, you can practice the pilgrims. Discovery by noticing how your perspective on the day's events might shift depending on your internal state. The challenges you faced today, can they be seen as obstacles that blocked your progress, or as opportunities that strengthened your resilience? The people you interacted with, were they sources of frustration or teachers offering lessons in patience and understanding? The Buddha said, "Everything we hear is an opinion, not a fact. Everything we see is a perspective, not the truth." This teaching invites us to hold our viewpoints lightly, recognizing them as useful tools for navigating life rather than absolute descriptions of reality. As you settle into rest, imagine yourself like the pilgrims completing their circumambulation, carrying with you multiple perspectives on your own experience. The part of you that struggled today, the part that felt successful, the part that experienced joy, the part that encountered difficulty, all of these are partial views of your complete being, like different faces of the mountain that exists beyond any single perspective. In resting in this larger view, You discover that you are vast enough to contain all of your different experiences without being limited by any of them. Like the mountain that remains itself, whether seen from east or west, in sunlight or shadow. Your essential nature is stable and peaceful, regardless of which aspects of your experience are currently visible to your awareness. In the mountain valley of Zanskar, where winter isolates communities for months behind walls of snow, there lived a healer named Dolma, whose reputation for miraculous cures had spread throughout the region. People would travel for days, sometimes weeks, to reach her simple stone house, bringing ailments that other practitioners had declared hopeless chronic pain that had persisted for years, illnesses that had baffled learned doctors, emotional wounds that seemed too deep to heal. What made Dolma's success so remarkable was not her extensive knowledge of medicinal herbs, though she was indeed skilled in the traditional healing arts passed down through generations of women in her family. What set her apart was something far more subtle, a quality of presence that seemed to activate healing in others simply through her way of being with them. Dolma's healing sessions were unlike any traditional medical treatment. When patients arrived at her home, often exhausted from difficult journeys and weakened by chronic suffering, she would first invite them to rest completely, not just physically, though she did provide comfortable cushions and warm blankets, but to rest from their struggle against their condition, from their anxiety about the future, from their efforts to manage and control their symptoms. Your healing has already begun, she would tell each new patient, simply by arriving here and allowing yourself to receive care. My task is not to fight your illness, but to help you remember the wholeness that exists beneath whatever is troubling your body or mind. Her approach puzzled many visitors who came, expecting dramatic herbal remedies or complex therapeutic procedures. Instead, Dolma would often begin by simply sitting quietly with her patients, her attention fully present with whatever they were experiencing, pain, fear, grief, or confusion, without any apparent urgency to change or fix their condition. Tenzin, a middle-aged trader who had suffered from severe back pain for 3 years, was typical of those who initially doubted Dolma's methods. The constant ache had progressively worsened despite treatments from various healers, until he could barely load his yaks for the trading journeys that supported his family. When he arrived at Dolma's home, he could barely walk upright. "I need strong medicine," he told her urgently. "The pain prevents me from working, from sleeping, from enjoying any aspect of my life. Other healers have given me remedies, but nothing provides lasting relief. I've heard you can cure conditions that seem hopeless." Instead of immediately examining his back or prescribing treatment, Dolma invited Tenzin to lie down on the soft carpet in her main room. "First," she said gently, "let me understand what you have been carrying, beyond just this physical pain." As Tenzin settled into the comfortable position, Dolma sat beside him with the kind of relaxed attention that suggested she had all the time in the world. "Tell me about the pain," she said simply. Tenzin began describing his symptoms, the specific location of the ache when it was worst, what activities aggravated it. But as he spoke, Dolma's gentle questions gradually led him to share more than just medical details. He found himself talking about the stress of supporting his extended family, the pressure he felt to maintain his reputation as a successful trader, the fear that his growing disability might force him to abandon the livelihood that defined his identity. "I am the strong one," he admitted, his voice thick with emotion. "Everyone depends on me, my wife, my children, my elderly parents, even my younger brother's family. If I cannot work, what happens to all of them?" Sometimes the worry about letting them down hurts more than my back." As Tenzin spoke, Dolma listened with complete attention, her presence conveying both deep compassion and unshakable strength. She didn't offer advice or reassurance, but simply witnessed his experience with the kind of acceptance that allowed him to feel fully heard and understood. "You have been carrying a very heavy load," she observed quietly, "much heavier than the packs on your trading expeditions. Your back has been trying to support not just your physical work, but also all your family's security, everyone's expectations, and your own identity as the provider. No wonder it has begun to protest, for the first time in months." Tenzin felt a slight loosening in his chronically tight muscles, not from any physical manipulation, but from the simple relief of having his complete situation acknowledged with understanding rather than judgment. Over the following hour, Dolma guided Tenzin through what she called the practice of gentle receiving. Instead of fighting against his pain or trying to ignore it, she taught him to breathe softly around it, to offer it the same kind of tender attention he would give to a frightened child. "Pain is often the body's way of asking for care," she explained as she placed her warm hands lightly on his shoulders. "When we meet it with resistance and frustration, it tends to intensify. When we can offer it gentle attention, it often begins to soften and release what it has been guarding." As they worked together, something remarkable happened. Tenzin began to feel not just physical relief, but an emotional lightening that he hadn't experienced in years. The crushing sense of responsibility that had weighed on him like a massive stone began to shift into a more manageable awareness of his love for his family. "I still care deeply about providing for everyone," he told Dolma as their session concluded. "But I'm beginning to understand that driving myself into the ground doesn't actually serve them. If I can learn to carry my responsibilities with less tension, perhaps I can carry them more effectively and for much longer." Dolma sent Tenzin home with a simple herbal preparation for inflammation, but more importantly, with a daily practice of gentle self-attention that would help him maintain the inner softening they had discovered together. "The herbs will help your body heal," she told him, "but your practice of being kind to yourself will prevent the pain from returning." Word of Tenzin's remarkable improvement spread quickly through the valley, bringing even more visitors to Dalma's door. But she never claimed credit for the healing that occurred in her presence. "I don't cure anyone," she would explain to those who praised her abilities. "I simply help people remember how to be gentle with themselves, how to offer their own suffering the same compassion they would naturally give to a beloved friend." This understanding had developed through Dolma's own journey with illness and healing. As a young woman, she had suffered from a chronic digestive condition that caused severe pain and weakness. Years of trying various treatments had provided only temporary relief, and she had gradually sunk into despair about her health and her future. The turning point came when she met an elderly nun who taught her a practice that seemed almost too simple to be effective. Instead of fighting your illness as an enemy, the nun suggested, try speaking to it as you would address a distressed child. What might your stomach be trying to tell you? What kind of care might it be requesting? Initially, Dolma found this approach ridiculous. How could talking gently to her digestive system accomplish what sophisticated medicines had failed to achieve? But in her desperation, she was willing to try anything. To her amazement, when she began offering her painful stomach the same kind of tender attention she would give to a crying baby, the chronic tension in her abdomen began to slowly release. More importantly, she began to understand the connection between her physical symptoms and the emotional stress she had been carrying from early childhood traumas that she never properly addressed. My body had been trying to get my attention for years, she later realized. Not to punish me, but to help me heal wounds that went much deeper than digestive issues. When I learned to listen with compassion instead of just trying to silence the symptoms, my body could finally guide me toward complete healing. This personal experience became the foundation of Delma's approach to healing others. She understood that symptoms, whether physical or emotional, were often expressions of deeper wisdom trying to emerge, and that true healing required not just treating the surface manifestation, but understanding and addressing the root causes with loving attention. Over time, Delma's practice evolved into what she called healing through wholeness, helping people recognize that their essential nature was already complete and healthy, regardless of whatever temporary conditions might be affecting their bodies or minds. We don't create wellness, she would explain. We uncover the wellness that is always present beneath whatever is troubling us. The Buddha taught, if you truly loved yourself, you would never harm another. If you truly loved another, you would never harm yourself. This teaching points to the deep connection between self-compassion and healing, recognizing that our relationship with our own suffering determines whether that suffering becomes a source of wisdom and growth, or simply a source of additional pain. Why do we so often meet our physical and emotional pain with resistance, rather than the kind of gentle attention that Dharma cultivated? Buddhist understanding points to our conditioning to see symptoms as enemies to be defeated rather than as communications from our own body-mind wisdom that deserve respectful attention. This adversarial relationship with our experience creates what Buddhist psychology calls the second arrow, the additional suffering we create through our resistance to what we're already experiencing. The original pain or discomfort is like a first arrow that strikes us. Our anger at the pain, our fear about what it means, our desperate efforts to make it go away immediately, these become second arrows that we shoot at ourselves, often creating more suffering than the original condition. Dalma's healing approach embodies what Buddhist compassion practices call loving kindness toward our own experience. This doesn't mean passive acceptance of harmful conditions or avoiding appropriate medical treatment, but rather bringing the same quality of care to our own suffering that we would naturally offer to a loved one facing similar difficulties. The practice of gentle receiving that Dharma taught reflects the Buddhist understanding that healing happens not through force but through creating optimal conditions for the body-mind's natural healing intelligence to function. Like a gardener who cannot make plants grow but can provide good soil, water, and sunlight, Dharma helped people create internal conditions where healing could naturally occur. In traditional Buddhist medicine, illness is understood as arising from imbalance, physical, emotional, mental, or spiritual disharmony that disrupts the natural flow of health. True healing, therefore, involves not just addressing symptoms, but restoring the deeper equilibrium that allows all aspects of our being to function in harmony. This holistic approach recognizes that physical symptoms often carry emotional or spiritual information. Tenzin's back pain wasn't just a mechanical problem, but reflected the way he was carrying psychological and social pressures. When he learned to address the emotional component of his burden, the physical symptoms could also begin to resolve. Dharma's presence itself was therapeutic because it embodied the quality of unconditional acceptance that allows healing to unfold naturally. In her presence, people could temporarily stop the internal struggle against their condition and discover the peace that exists even in the midst of pain or illness. Tonight, as you prepare for rest, you can practice Dharma's teaching by bringing gentle attention to any discomfort in your body or mind. Instead of trying to force relaxation or push away tension, Can you offer yourself the same kind of tender care that Dharma provided to her patients? Can you speak to your tired body or worried mind with the same compassion you would offer to a dear friend? The Buddha said, "Hatred is never overcome by hatred. Hatred is overcome by love." This is an eternal law. This principle applies not only to our relationships with others, but to our relationship with our own difficult experiences. Physical tension, emotional upset, and mental restlessness often soften naturally when met with patient kindness rather than frustrated resistance. As you settle into rest, imagine yourself held by the same healing presence that surrounded Dharma's patients, completely accepted, perfectly safe, deserving of the deepest care and gentleness. In learning to be a source of compassion for your own experience, you discover that healing is not something that must be achieved from outside, but a natural capacity that unfolds when we create the proper conditions of love and acceptance within our own hearts. Let us now visit a small fishing village where a young boy learned from his wise grandfather that true love means wanting the beloved to be free, even when that freedom carries them beyond our reach. In a small fishing village on the coast of ancient Japan, where the rhythm of daily life flowed with the tides, there lived a 7-year-old boy named Kenji, whose greatest treasure was a paper boat his grandfather had folded for him from pages of beautiful calligraphy. The boat was perfect in every detail, its crisp edges, its precise folds, the way it sat perfectly balanced when placed on water, and especially the elegant characters that decorated its sides with poems about the moon's reflection on the sea. Kenji's grandfather, Hiroshi, was the village's most respected elder, known for his wisdom, his skill in traditional arts, and his patient way of teaching children about the deeper meanings hidden within simple activities. The paper boat had been his gift to Kenji on the boy's 7th birthday, along with a promise that when Kenji was ready, his grandfather would teach him the secret art of origami that transformed flat paper into beautiful, living forms. For months, the paper boat had been Kenji's constant companion. He carried it with him everywhere, carefully protected in a small silk pouch his mother had sewn. During family meals, the boat would sit beside his rice bowl like an honored guest. When he walked to the village market with his mother, the boat traveled safely in his pocket. At night, it rested on the small table beside his sleeping mat, where moonlight would sometimes catch the graceful curves of its calligraphed sides. Kenji spent hours each day playing with his treasure, floating it in shallow pools of rainwater, sailing it in the large ceramic basin his mother used for washing clothes, and creating elaborate imaginary adventures where the tiny vessel carried brave sailors across dangerous seas to distant lands. The boat seemed to possess magical qualities. It never became soggy or collapsed, never lost its perfect shape, despite countless launchings and retrievals. As spring arrived and the mountain streams swelled with snowmelt, Kenji began to dream of floating his boat in real flowing water instead of the static pools and basins where it had always sailed. Behind the village, a clear stream rushed down from the hills, creating small eddies and rapids that seemed perfect for testing his boat's seaworthiness in authentic conditions. One warm afternoon, when his chores were finished and his mother was busy with her weaving, Kenji slipped away to the stream with his precious boat. The water was higher than usual from recent rains, running swift and clear over the smooth stones that lined the stream. He chose a quiet pool where the current slowed, gently placed his boat on the surface, and watched with delight as it bobbed and turned in the gentle swirling water. For several minutes, Kenji guided the boat around the pool with a long grass stem, marveling at how gracefully it moved through the water. how the calligraphed poems seemed to dance as the boat turned and drifted. This was everything he had imagined. His boat was finally sailing in real water, experiencing the kind of adventure he had dreamed about during all those months of careful indoor play. But then, without warning, a stronger current caught the boat and began pulling it toward the outlet where the pool connected to the mainstream. Kenji lunged forward, trying to catch it with his grass stem, but the boat slipped just beyond his reach. Within seconds, it was caught in the swift current, spinning and racing downstream far faster than Kenji could follow along the steep, rocky bank. "My boat," he cried out, scrambling downstream as quickly as the difficult terrain would allow, watching helplessly as his treasure grew smaller and smaller in the distance. The stream curved around a large boulder, and suddenly the boat disappeared from sight, carried away by water that moved too fast for any chance of recovery. Kenji stood on the bank where he had lost sight of his boat, tears streaming down his face, overwhelmed by a loss that felt far greater than the simple disappearance of a toy. The boat had been more than an object to him. It represented his connection to his beloved grandfather, his dreams of future adventures, his sense of having something precious and uniquely his own. Now it was gone, swept away by the very element he had hoped would bring it fully to life. When Kenji failed to return home by evening, his worried parents searched the village until they found him still sitting by the stream, staring at the water that had carried away his treasure. His father, Masato, was initially angry about Kenji's unauthorized adventure, but when he saw the depth of his son's grief, his frustration melted into compassion. "Tell me what happened," Masato said gently, sitting beside his son on the grassy bank. Through tears, Kenji recounted the story of the boat's escape, his voice heavy with self-recrimination. "I was so stupid," he sobbed. "I should have been more careful. I should have held on to it somehow. Now grandfather's beautiful gift is lost forever, probably torn apart by rocks or sunk in some deep pool where no one will ever find it." Instead of offering immediate comfort or trying to minimize his son's pain, Masato sat quietly with Kenji as darkness fell around them, allowing the boy to fully experience his grief without rushing to fix or explain it away. Finally, when Kenji's sobs had quieted 2 occasional sniffles, his father spoke. "Tomorrow morning, we will visit grandfather and tell him what happened. I think he will have something important to share with you about your boat's journey." The next day, Kenji approached his grandfather's house with heavy steps, dreading the conversation he had to have. How could he explain to this wise, patient man that he had carelessly lost such a precious gift? How could he face his grandfather's disappointment and perhaps anger at his irresponsibility? But when Hiroshi heard Kenji's tearful account of the boat's escape, his response surprised everyone. Instead of scolding or expressing disappointment, the old man's face lit up with what appeared to be genuine delight. "Kenji," he said, with obvious pleasure, "you have given my little boat the greatest gift possible, the chance to fulfill its true purpose." Kenji looked confused, unsure how losing the boat could possibly be seen as a gift. "But grandfather, it's gone forever. I'll never see it again. I've lost something you made specially for me." Hiroshi gestured for his grandson to sit beside him on the porch, overlooking the village and the sea beyond. "Tell me, Kenji, what do you think boats are made for?" "For sailing," Kenji replied, though he wasn't sure where this question was leading. "And where do boats most long to sail?" In ... in real water." "Exactly. And what kind of water calls most strongly to any boat's spirit?" Kenji thought about this carefully. Moving water, water that flows toward the sea, His grandfather nodded approvingly. For months, that beautiful boat lived safely in your room, carefully protected from any danger. It was treasured and loved, but it never had the chance to experience what it was created for: to dance with flowing water, to ride the current, to discover what lay around each bend of the stream. As Hiroshi spoke, Kenji began to see his loss from a completely different perspective. You mean, the boat wanted to sail away? Think of it this way, his grandfather continued. Your boat is now having the adventure of its lifetime, carried by water that connects to streams and rivers, and eventually to the vast ocean. It might travel farther than either of us will ever go, see sights we can only imagine, experience the kind of freedom that comes only to those who are willing to let go of safety and embrace the unknown. Kenji sat quietly for several minutes, trying to adjust his thinking from loss to adventure, from tragedy to freedom. But grandfather, I loved that boat so much. How can letting go of something you love ever be good? Hiroshi smiled with the gentle wisdom of someone who had spent many years learning life's most difficult lessons. The deepest kind of love, Kenji, is the love that wants the beloved to be free and happy, even if that means they cannot stay with us. Your boat could have remained safe in your room forever, but would that have been the life it was meant for? As they talked, Kenji began to imagine his boat's current journey, perhaps floating past villages he had never seen, carrying its beautiful calligraphy to distant places where other people might glimpse it and feel momentarily touched by beauty. Maybe finally reaching the ocean where it would join the vast waters that connected all lands. I think I understand, Kenji said slowly. I wanted to keep the boat close to me because I loved it. But maybe really loving it means being happy that it's free to have the adventures it was made for, even if I can't be part of them. That is wisdom beyond your years, Hiroshi said proudly. And because you understand this truth, you're ready to learn something even more wonderful than folding paper boats. Over the following weeks, Hiroshi began teaching Kenji not just the art of origami, but the deeper philosophy behind it. Each fold, he explained, was an act of giving form to emptiness, of creating beauty that was meant to be appreciated and then allowed to return to formlessness. The true master of origami learned to create without attachment to keeping, to pour love into each creation while remaining free from possessive clinging. When you can fold 1,000 boats, Hiroshi told his grandson, and release each one with joy rather than sadness, you will understand one of life's greatest secrets, that the things we love most fully are the things we can let go of most easily. Months later, Kenji had indeed learned to fold beautiful boats, cranes, flowers, and many other forms. But more importantly, he had learnt to create each piece as a gift to the world rather than a possession to be grasped. Sometimes he would fold boats specifically to release in the stream, watching with joy rather than sorrow as they sailed away toward unknown adventures. Each boat I let go teaches me something about love, he told his grandfather one afternoon as they sat by the water, watching a small fleet of origami vessels drift downstream. The more freely I can release them, the more joy I feel in making them. Hiroshi nodded with deep satisfaction. You have learned the secret that takes many people a lifetime to understand. Kenji, true happiness comes not from holding on to what we love, but from loving so fully that we want the best for whatever we care about, even if that means letting it go. The Buddha taught, in the end, only 3 things matter: how much you loved, how gently you lived, and how gracefully you let go of things not meant for you. Kenji's story illuminates this profound truth. showing how the deepest form of love is not possessive attachment, but the generous spirit that wants the beloved to flourish, even if that flourishing takes them beyond our reach. Why do we find it so difficult to let go of what we treasure most? Buddhist psychology points to our fundamental confusion between love and attachment, between caring and clinging. We believe that the intensity of our grip on something reflects the depth of our love for it, when in fact, the opposite is often true. Genuine love naturally wants to free the beloved to experience their fullest expression. This confusion creates suffering because it puts us at odds with the basic nature of reality, which is constant change and flow. Like Kenji initially trying to keep his boat safe in static pools, we attempt to freeze dynamic processes into permanent forms. But streams are meant to flow, children are meant to grow, relationships are meant to evolve, and all experiences are meant to arise, flourish, and pass away in their own natural timing. The paper boat in this story represents anything precious in our lives that we try to protect by controlling or limiting. Sometimes we hold our children too tightly, preventing them from developing independence. Sometimes we cling to relationships, suffocating them with possessive demands. Sometimes we grasp our own identities so rigidly that we cannot adapt to life's changing circumstances. Grandfather Hiroshi's wisdom shows the alternative, what Buddhists call non-attached love. This doesn't mean caring less or becoming emotionally distant, but rather loving so completely that we want what is genuinely best for the object of our love, regardless of whether that serves our own desires for closeness or control. The origami practice that Kenji learns embodies this principle perfectly. Each creation requires skill, attention, and care to bring into being. But the deepest satisfaction comes not from accumulating a collection of paper sculptures, but from the joy of creation itself, and the generous act of releasing each piece to fulfill its own destiny. This teaching has profound implications for how we approach all of our attachments, our relationships, our possessions, our ideas about how life should unfold, even our spiritual achievements. All of these can be held lightly, like origami boats that we create with love and release with gratitude. The stream in Kenji's story represents the natural flow of life itself, unpredictable, sometimes gentle, sometimes swift, always moving toward the vast ocean of existence that connects all separate streams. When we can align ourselves with this flow rather than fighting against it, we discover a different kind of security, not the brittle security of trying to keep everything the same, but the flexible security of knowing we can adapt to whatever changes arise. Kenji's transformation from grief to joy illustrates what Buddhist teachings call the alchemy of letting go. What initially appears as loss reveals itself as freedom when we can shift our perspective from possession to appreciation, from holding to releasing, from fear of change to trust in natural unfolding. This doesn't mean becoming passive or indifferent to outcomes. Kenji continued to care deeply about his origami creations and took great pleasure in making them beautiful and well crafted. But he learned to hold his caring lightly, creating with full engagement while remaining unattached to controlling the results. In meditation practice, students often experience this same progression. Initially, they may cling to peaceful states when they arise, trying to make them permanent. But gradually they learn to appreciate these experiences fully while letting them pass naturally, discovering that non-attachment actually allows for deeper and more sustained well-being than grasping ever could. The relationship between Kenji and his grandfather also illustrates how wisdom is transmitted, not through abstract teachings, but through patient guidance. that allows understanding to develop organically. Hiroshi didn't lecture his grandson about He created conditions where Kenji could discover these truths through his own experience. Tonight, as you prepare for rest, you can practice Kenji's lesson in letting go. What are you holding too tightly in your life? What boats are you keeping in safe pools when they might be meant for the adventure of flowing streams? Can you imagine releasing your worries, your need to control tomorrow's outcomes, your grip on how things should unfold, and instead trust the natural wisdom of life's flowing process? The Buddha said, "You only lose what you cling to." In learning to create with love and release with joy, we discover that what we thought we were losing was actually being transformed into something far more beautiful. The freedom to love, without limit, because we no longer fear loss. As you settle into rest, imagine yourself like Kenji by the stream, folding boats of intention and prayer, then watching with delight as they sail away toward the mysterious ocean of possibility. Each breath you release can be like letting go of a paper boat, carrying away the tensions and concerns of the day, making space for the natural rest and renewal that flows toward you when you stop trying to control its timing or form. In the high desert of Ladakh, where the air is thin and clear, and the vast sky seems to stretch beyond the edge of the world, there sat a small monastery called Dixgompa, perched on a hilltop like a meditation cushion placed by the gods themselves. The monastery had stood there for over 600 years, its white walls and golden roofs weathering countless seasons, its bells marking the rhythm of prayers that connected earth to sky. The monks who lived in this sacred place had developed, over many generations, a particular wisdom about the nature of change and transformation. Unlike monasteries in more populated areas, where dramatic events and visitors provided regular variety, life at Dixgompa followed rhythms so subtle and gradual that change itself became a meditation, a teaching about the profound power of gentle, patient unfolding. Among the monastery's residents was a young monk named Lobsang, who had arrived 3 years earlier, full of enthusiasm for the spiritual life, but also carrying expectations about how dramatic awakening should be. He had read accounts of sudden enlightenment, of masters who achieved profound realization in moments of startling insight, of transformations that arrived like lightning, splitting the darkness of ignorance. Lobsang practiced diligently, rising before dawn for meditation, studying sacred texts with devoted attention, performing his assigned duties with careful mindfulness. Yet, despite his sincere efforts, he felt frustrated by what seemed to be a lack of significant spiritual progress. His meditation sessions were peaceful but unremarkable. His understanding of the teachings grew steadily, but without dramatic breakthroughs. His daily life continued with the same gentle routines, unmarked by the kind of extraordinary experiences he believed should accompany serious spiritual practice. "Rinpoche," he said one evening to his teacher, Geshe Tenzin, using the honorific title reserved for the most accomplished masters, "I have been practicing faithfully for 3 years. Yet I feel no closer to enlightenment than when I arrived. When will I experience the great transformation that the texts describe? When will the dawn of true understanding illuminate my ignorance?" Geshe Tenzin, a man whose wisdom had been seasoned by 40 years of patient practice, listened to his students' frustration with the compassionate attention that marked truly mature teachers. Instead of offering immediate answers or reassurance, he suggested something unexpected. "Tomorrow morning," he said, "I want you to sit outside on the eastern wall of the monastery and watch carefully for the moment when dawn arrives. Pay very close attention to exactly when night becomes day. Come to me afterward and tell me precisely when this transformation occurred." Lobsang was puzzled by this apparently simple assignment, but his respect for his teacher led him to approach it with serious attention. Well before sunrise the next morning, he positioned himself on the monastery's eastern wall, facing the mountains where the sun would eventually appear. The night was still complete. Stars filled the vast sky, and the landscape below lay wrapped in deep darkness. For the first hour, nothing seemed to change. The darkness appeared absolute, with no hint that dawn was approaching. Lobsang began to wonder if he had risen too early, if perhaps he should have waited until closer to the actual sunrise time. But something in his teacher's manner had suggested that this exercise was more important than it appeared. So he continued his patient observation. Gradually, almost imperceptibly, Lobsang began to notice the faintest suggestion that the quality of darkness was shifting. It wasn't that light was appearing. He could see no visible change in the landscape or sky. Rather, it was as if the darkness itself was becoming somehow less dense, less complete, though he couldn't point to any specific evidence for this subtle alteration. As more time passed, this barely perceptible lightening continued so gradually that Lobsang found it impossible to identify any particular moment when change was occurring. The transformation was happening continuously, but so gently that each individual moment seemed identical to the one before it. There was no sudden switch from night to day, no dramatic moment when darkness gave way to light. By the time Lobsang could actually see the mountains silhouetted against the sky, he realized the dawn had already been arriving for hours without his being able to pinpoint when it had begun. The process continued as the sky slowly brightened from deep blue to pale gray to the softest pink, each transition flowing so seamlessly into the next that no clear boundaries could be identified. When the sun finally appeared above the mountain peaks, flooding the monastery and surrounding landscape with golden light, Lobsang understood that he had been watching the culmination of a process that had been unfolding steadily throughout his entire vigil. Dawn hadn't arrived at the moment the sun became visible. It had been arriving throughout the night, so gradually and gently that its progress was visible only in retrospect. That evening, when Lobsang met with his teacher to report on his dawn observation, he found himself struggling to describe what he had witnessed. "Rinpoche," he said, "I cannot tell you when dawn arrived because it never exactly arrived. It was always arriving. The transformation from night to day happened so gradually that I couldn't identify any specific moment when it occurred." Geshe Tenzin nodded with obvious satisfaction. "And how does this relate to your earlier question about spiritual transformation and the dawn of understanding?" As the connection became clear, Lobsang felt a shift in his entire understanding of the spiritual path. "My awakening has been like the dawn," he said slowly. "I was looking for a dramatic moment of sudden illumination, but the real transformation has been happening gradually all along, so gently that I haven't noticed it occurring." His teacher smiled. "Tell me, how do you feel right now compared to when you first arrived at the monastery 3 years ago? Not about dramatic spiritual experiences, but about the simple quality of your daily awareness, your capacity for patience, your relationship with difficult emotions, your ability to find peace in ordinary moments." As Lobsang honestly examined these subtle qualities, he realized that profound changes had indeed occurred. His mind was significantly calmer than when he had arrived. His reactions to challenging situations were more measured and compassionate. His appreciation for simple experiences, the taste of morning tea, the sound of wind in the prayer flags, the feeling of sitting in meditation, had deepened immeasurably. But these transformations had happened so gradually that he had failed to recognize their significance. "It's like the dawn," he said with growing excitement. "The light of understanding has been growing steadily. But because I was watching for a sudden sunrise, I missed the gentle brightening that was actually occurring." Over the following months, this new understanding transformed Lobsang's entire approach to practice. Instead of waiting impatiently for dramatic breakthroughs, he began to appreciate the subtle signs of ongoing development that appeared each day. The way his breathing naturally slowed during meditation, the increasing ease with which he could maintain mindful attention during routine activities, the growing spaciousness he felt around difficult emotions. He began to notice that many of the monastery's most accomplished practitioners embodied this same quality of gradual, patient development. Their wisdom hadn't appeared suddenly, but had accumulated like gentle snowfall, each day adding another barely perceptible layer until the accumulation became substantial, enough to transform the entire landscape of their being. Geshe Tenzin began using Lobsang's dawn experience as a teaching for other students who struggled with similar impatience about their spiritual progress. "Most people expect awakening to be like a light switch being turned on," he would explain. "But it's actually more like watching dawn arrive, a gentle, continuous brightening that's happening all the time, though we may not notice it from moment to moment." This understanding extended beyond individual spiritual development to the way the monastery itself changed and evolved over time. New students would arrive expecting to find dramatic differences between their old life and their new monastic existence. But the most profound transformations occurred through the accumulation of thousands of small moments, daily meditations, shared meals eaten in mindful silence, work performed with careful attention, seasons changing imperceptibly around their consistent practice. The monastery's very architecture reflected this wisdom about gradual transformation. The buildings had been constructed and maintained through centuries of patient work, each generation adding small improvements and repairs that gradually refined the structure without dramatic alterations. The walls bore the patina of countless sunrise meditations. The floors were worn smooth by decades of walking meditation. The meditation hall held the accumulated peace of millions of moments of prayer and contemplation. Years later, when Lobsang had become a teacher himself, he would often guide new students through the same dawn-watching exercise that had transformed his understanding. "Spiritual development," he would tell them, "is not like a factory that produces sudden, dramatic results. It's like a garden where seeds planted with loving attention grow quietly, underground for months before showing any visible signs of life, then continue growing so gradually that their progress is only apparent when we compare them to how they were in previous seasons." He learned to help students recognize and celebrate the subtle signs of their own gentle awakening, the gradual increase in their capacity for patience, the slowly developing ability to maintain equanimity during difficulties, the gentle deepening of compassion that occurred almost below the threshold of conscious awareness. "The dawn comes every day," he would remind them, "but it comes quietly, gently, without fanfare or drama. It doesn't announce its arrival with trumpet calls or lightning flashes. It simply arrives through the patient accumulation of increasing light, until suddenly we realize that what was dark has become illuminated, not through a single moment of transformation, but through countless moments of gentle change." The Buddha taught, "Drop by drop, the water pot is filled." Likewise, the wise one, gathering it little by little, fills himself with good. This teaching points to one of the most important yet often overlooked aspects of genuine transformation, that the most profound and lasting changes occur through the patient accumulation of small, consistent efforts rather than through dramatic breakthrough experiences. Why do we so often expect sudden transformation rather than recognizing the power of gradual development? Buddhist understanding points to our cultural conditioning toward instant gratification and dramatic results. We live in a world that celebrates sudden success, overnight fame, and revolutionary breakthroughs, while overlooking the steady, patient work that underlies all genuine achievement. This bias toward dramatic change creates unrealistic expectations about spiritual development that can actually interfere with the natural process of awakening. Like Lobsang watching for a sudden sunrise, we may become so focused on waiting for extraordinary experiences that we miss the gentle brightening that is actually occurring through our daily practice. The dawn metaphor in this story illuminates how authentic transformation works in all areas of life, not just spiritual development. Whether we're developing skills, healing from trauma, changing harmful habits, or deepening relationships, the most significant progress usually happens through the accumulation of small, consistent efforts rather than through sudden breakthroughs. In Buddhist meditation, this principle is called ripening, the gradual maturation of insight and realization through sustained practice. Seeds of understanding planted through study and meditation may remain underground for months or years before showing visible results. But when they do emerge, they do so with the stability and depth that comes only from patient, underground development. This doesn't mean that sudden insights never occur in spiritual practice. But even apparent breakthrough moments are usually the culmination of long periods of gradual preparation, like the visible sunrise that represents the completion of hours of invisible dawn. Without the patient groundwork, sudden insights lack the foundation needed for lasting transformation. Lobsang's experience also illustrates how our expectations can blind us to the very changes we're seeking. When we're looking for dramatic transformation, we may overlook the subtle shifts in awareness, compassion, and wisdom that represent the real fruit of spiritual practice. The most important developments often occur below the threshold of conscious recognition, like the underground root system that must develop before a plant can flower. The monastic setting of this story emphasizes how transformation happens within the context of daily routine rather than despite it. The monk's simple schedule of meditation, study, and service provided the stable container within which subtle awakening could gradually unfold. Like the monastery's ancient walls that became beautiful through centuries of patient weathering, human consciousness develops its wisdom through the consistent practice of presence and attention. Tonight, as you rest, you can apply Lobsang's discovery to your own life. Instead of waiting for dramatic changes in your capacity for peace or happiness, can you notice the subtle signs of gentle awakening that may already be occurring? Perhaps your breathing naturally slows when you lie down to rest. Maybe your body knows how to release tension without conscious effort, or your mind naturally becomes quieter as you settle into the transition toward sleep. The Buddha said, "A jug fills drop by drop, each moment of conscious presence, each breath breathed with awareness. Each small act of kindness toward yourself or others adds to the accumulation of awakening that is always gradually occurring, whether or not we notice it from moment to moment." As you drift toward sleep, imagine yourself like Lobsang sitting on the monastery wall, witnessing the gentle arrival of dawn in your own consciousness. The peace you seek is not waiting for some future moment of dramatic breakthrough. It is arriving quietly, continuously, through the patient accumulation of moments like this one, where you simply allow yourself to rest in the natural unfolding of awareness itself. In the ancient city of Varanasi, where the sacred Ganges River has carried prayers and ashes for thousands of years, there lived an elderly woman named Kamala, who had become renowned throughout the region for her profound wisdom and her mysterious teaching methods. Unlike the scholarly monks, who taught through lengthy discourses and complex philosophical debates, Kamala's instruction was extraordinarily simple. Yet students who learned from her often experienced transformations that eluded those who studied with more conventional teachers. Kamala lived in a modest house near the river, where she received visitors in a plain room containing only the most basic furnishings: a few cushions for sitting, a low wooden table, and shelves lined with simple clay bowls of various sizes. What made these bowls remarkable was not their craftsmanship, which was unremarkable, but the fact that they were all completely empty. No water, no food, no flowers, no offerings of any kind, just empty vessels sitting silently on wooden shelves. Students who came to learn from Kamala often felt puzzled by these empty bowls. They seemed to serve no practical purpose, yet their presence dominated the teaching space. Some visitors assumed they were meant to be filled with something, perhaps offerings to deities, or medicinal herbs, or symbolic objects representing various spiritual principles. But when they asked Kamala about the bowl's purpose, she would simply smile and suggest they sit quietly and observe them more carefully. Among the many students who sought Kamala's guidance was a young scholar named Devika, who had spent years studying sacred texts at the university in nearby, where the Buddha had given his first teaching after his enlightenment. Devika possessed an exceptionally sharp intellect and had memorized vast portions of the Buddhist canon. But despite her extensive knowledge, she felt plagued by a restless dissatisfaction that no amount of study seemed to resolve. Respected teacher, Devika said during her first visit to Kamala's simple home, "I have mastered many philosophical texts and can debate the finest points of doctrine with learned scholars. Yet I feel empty inside, as if all my knowledge is somehow hollow and without real substance. How can someone who knows so much about wisdom feel so lacking in actual understanding?" Instead of offering immediate answers or engaging with the philosophical aspects of Devika's question, Kamala gestured toward the shelves of empty bowls. "Choose one," she said simply. Devika selected a medium-sized bowl from the middle shelf and held it in her hands, waiting for further instruction. "What do you see?" Kamala asked. "An empty bowl," Devika replied, wondering what insight this obvious observation was supposed to provide. "What can you do with an empty bowl?" Devika considered various possibilities. Fill it with water for drinking, or rice for eating, or flowers for offerings to the Buddha. ... double quotes. Yes, Kamala nodded. "And what could you do with that same bowl if it were already full of stones?" "Nothing useful," Devika admitted. "If it's already full of stones, it can't hold water or food or anything else I might need." Kamala smiled gently. "Your mind is like a bowl, child. You have filled it so completely with concepts, theories, and intellectual knowledge that there is no room left for direct experience or fresh understanding. You know many things about wisdom, but you cannot receive wisdom itself because there is no empty space in your awareness for it to enter." Over the following weeks, Kamala guided Devika through what she called the practice of purposeful emptiness, instead of adding more information to her already crowded mind. She began learning to create spaces of unknowing, periods where she deliberately set aside her accumulated knowledge and approached experiences with fresh, receptive awareness. "Sit with this bowl for an hour each day," Kamala instructed, giving Devika one of the empty vessels to take home. "But don't try to understand anything about it. Don't analyze its shape, its material, its symbolic meaning, or its relationship to Buddhist teachings. Simply be present with its emptiness, without trying to fill it with concepts or conclusions. At first, Devika found this practice almost unbearable. Her mind was so accustomed to constant analysis and interpretation that sitting quietly with an empty bowl, offering it no mental commentary or philosophical framework, felt like a form of intellectual starvation. Within minutes, thoughts would arise about the bowl's craftsmanship, its historical context, its possible symbolic meanings, its relationship to various teachings about emptiness in Buddhist philosophy. But each time these analytical thoughts arose, Devika learned to gently set them aside and return her attention to the simple, direct experience of empty space. Gradually, something remarkable began to happen. As her mind became less busy with commentary and interpretation, she began to notice qualities of awareness that she had never recognized before, a spacious stillness that existed beneath the constant chatter of intellectual activity, a peaceful presence that seemed to contain infinite potential for understanding without needing to grasp specific concepts. "I'm beginning to understand something," Devika told Kamala after several weeks of practice. "The emptiness of the bowl isn't a lack of something, it's what makes the bowl useful. Without that empty space, a bowl is just a heavy piece of clay. The emptiness is what gives it the capacity to receive and hold whatever is needed." Kamala nodded approvingly. "And what does this teach you about your own mind?" "That maybe my sense of feeling empty and lacking isn't a problem to be solved by filling myself with more knowledge," Devika said slowly. "Maybe it's actually a natural capacity for learning that I've been trying to eliminate instead of appreciating." As Devika's practice with the empty bowl deepened, she began to notice how this principle applied to all aspects of her experience. In conversations, she discovered that listening with an empty, receptive mind allowed her to hear much more than listening while formulating responses or comparing what others said to her existing knowledge. In her studies, approaching texts with a spacious, unknowing awareness often revealed meanings that had remained hidden when she read with her mind already full of assumptions and expectations. Most surprisingly, she found that meditation became much deeper when she stopped trying to fill her awareness with particular objects of concentration, and instead rested in the natural emptiness that was always present beneath the surface activity of thoughts and sensations. After months of practicing with purposeful emptiness, Devika experienced a profound shift in her understanding of what wisdom actually meant. "I used to think that being wise meant knowing many things," she told Kamala. "But now I'm beginning to see that real wisdom might be more about knowing how to remain empty enough to receive whatever understanding is needed in each moment." Kamala smiled with the satisfaction of a teacher whose student has discovered something essential through direct experience rather than intellectual study. "Tell me, Devika, what is the most useful part of a house?" "The empty space inside," Devika replied without hesitation. "The rooms that can be inhabited, not the walls that define them. And the most useful part of a wheel, the empty hub around which everything turns, and the most useful part of a mind seeking wisdom, the spacious awareness that can receive understanding, not the knowledge that might occupy it temporarily." As word spread about, Devika's transformation from restless scholar to peacefully present student, more people came to learn from Kamala's simple teaching with empty bowls. But the wise woman never allowed her method to become a rigid technique or formula. For some students, she suggested different practices: sitting with empty cups, walking in empty rooms, or simply spending time in the vast emptiness of the night sky. "The form doesn't matter," she would explain. What matters is learning to appreciate emptiness as fullness, to understand space as the most essential element in any container, to recognize that the most profound wisdom arises not from filling ourselves with information, but from creating optimal conditions for insight to emerge naturally. Years later, when Devika had become a teacher herself, she would often begin instruction by offering students empty bowls and inviting them to discover the teachings. These simple vessels contained the Buddha's first teaching, she would tell them, was about the Four Noble Truths. But perhaps his most important teaching was the empty space of awareness, in which those truths could be received and understood. Without that receptive emptiness, even the most profound teachings remain just words pointing toward experiences we cannot actually have. The Buddha taught, in the beginner's mind there are many possibilities, but in the expert's mind there are few. This wisdom points to the profound difference between knowledge that accumulates like stones in a bowl, gradually limiting our capacity for fresh understanding, and the spacious awareness that remains open to infinite possibilities for insight. Why do we so readily confuse mental accumulation with genuine wisdom? Buddhist psychology points to our deep conditioning to equate having information with understanding truth. From early education through professional training, we're taught that learning means filling our minds with facts, concepts, and theories. But spiritual wisdom requires a fundamentally different relationship with knowledge, one that values receptivity over accumulation, space over content. The empty bowl in Kamala's teaching represents what Buddhist philosophy calls beginner's mind or shoshin. This quality of awareness approaches each experience with fresh receptivity, without the burden of preconceptions or the limitations of thinking we already know what we're encountering. It's the mental state of a child exploring the world for the first time, where everything appears new and full of potential. In Zen practice, there's a famous saying, "Your everyday mind, that is the way." But our everyday mind is usually anything but empty. It's crowded with opinions, judgments, memories, plans, and constant mental commentary. The practice with empty bowls teaches us to recognize and cultivate the spacious awareness that exists beneath this surface activity, the open space of consciousness in which all thoughts and experiences arise. This doesn't mean eliminating thought or becoming mentally blank. The goal isn't to achieve some special empty state, but to recognize the natural spaciousness that is always present as the background of all mental activity, like the empty space inside a bowl that makes it functional. This aware emptiness is what allows consciousness to receive and work with whatever experiences arise. Devika's transformation from intellectual accumulation to receptive awareness illustrates how spiritual learning differs from academic study. In conventional education, success is measured by how much information we can retain and recall. But in wisdom traditions, development is measured by our increasing capacity to meet each situation with fresh perception, unclouded by rigid assumptions or preconceived ideas. The practice of purposeful emptiness that Kamala taught reflects a principle found throughout Buddhist meditation, that the most profound insights arise not through mental effort, but through creating optimal conditions for understanding to emerge naturally, like clearing weeds from a garden so that seeds can sprout. We clear mental clutter so that wisdom can arise from its own deeper source. This principle has practical applications in daily life beyond formal spiritual practice. In relationships, listening with empty, receptive attention often reveals much more about others than listening while our minds are busy, formulating responses or judgments. In creative work, Approaching projects with beginner's mind frequently leads to more innovative solutions than relying solely on accumulated expertise. The image of empty bowls on shelves also suggests the value of maintaining multiple capacities for different kinds of receiving, just as different bowls might be appropriate for different purposes. Water, food, offerings. Our awareness can learn to adjust its receptivity to match what each situation requires. Tonight, as you prepare for rest, you can practice Kamala's teaching about emptiness as fullness. Instead of trying to fill your awareness with relaxing thoughts or images, can you appreciate the spacious emptiness that naturally exists when you're not actively thinking about anything in particular? This isn't the emptiness of absence, but the fertile emptiness of pure potential, the aware space in which restful sleep naturally arises when conditions are right. The Buddha said, "Form is emptiness. Emptiness is form." This profound teaching reminds us that the apparent solidity of our thoughts, worries, and concerns is actually much more spacious and workable than it initially appears. When we rest in the empty awareness that underlies all mental activity, we discover that even our most solid-seeming problems have the same essential nature as space itself: vast, accommodating, and fundamentally peaceful. As you settle into rest, imagine yourself like Devika, learning to appreciate her empty bowl, not as something lacking that needs to be filled, but as the essential space that makes all receiving possible. In recognizing the natural emptiness of aware presence, you discover that you already possess the most important condition for deep rest: the spacious awareness in which all experiences, including sleep itself, naturally unfold. In the mountains of ancient Tibet, where the air is thin and the silence so complete it seems to have substance, there stood a small hermitage where an old Lama named Tenzin Norbu had spent the final 20 years of his life in solitary retreat. He had been a learned teacher in his younger days, guiding many students through the complexities of Buddhist philosophy and meditation practice. But as he grew older, his teaching had gradually simplified until he focused on just one profound truth, which he expressed through the most elementary of drawings. Each morning, after his personal meditation and prayers, Tenzin Norbu would take a piece of charcoal and draw a simple circle on a flat stone beside his hermitage. The circle was never quite perfect. His aging hands trembled slightly, and he worked without instruments or guides, but it was complete, unbroken, with no beginning or end that could be identified. He would spend long periods contemplating this simple shape, finding in it a depth of meaning that had eluded him during decades of studying complex philosophical texts. Word of the hermit's daily circle drawing had spread to nearby monasteries and villages, creating a puzzling reputation. Some people assumed he had grown senile in his isolation, reduced to drawing childish pictures. Others suspected he was practicing some advanced tantric technique, too esoteric for ordinary understanding. A few believed he had achieved such profound realization that he could perceive ultimate truth in the simplest forms. Among those intrigued by stories of the circle-drawing Lama was a young monk named Pema, who served as a messenger between various monasteries in the region. During his travels, he had heard countless theories about what Tenzin Norbu's daily practice might signify, but no one seemed to know for certain. The mystery grew in Pema's mind until he felt compelled to make the difficult journey to the hermitage and discover for himself what wisdom might be hidden in such a simple activity. The path to Tenzin Norbu's retreat was arduous, climbing through steep valleys and across high passes that left Pema breathless despite his youth and fitness. When he finally reached the hermitage late one afternoon, He found the elderly Lama sitting quietly beside a smooth stone surface where a fresh circle had been drawn, its black lines stark against the grey rock. "Rinpoche," Pema said, using the respectful title for accomplished masters, "I have traveled many days to learn from you. I have heard that you draw circles that contain profound teachings. Please share with me the wisdom hidden in this simple shape." Tenzin Norbu looked up at his visitor with eyes that held both kindness and a depth of understanding that comes only from decades of patient practice. But instead of offering explanations or philosophical discourse, he simply pointed to the circle and said, "What do you see?" Pema studied the drawing carefully, trying to discern what profound meaning might be embedded in its simple form. "I see a circle, Rinpoche. A line that curves back to meet itself, forming a closed shape with no corners or angles. Where does it begin?" the old Lama asked. Pema examined the circle more closely, looking for some indication of where the drawing had started. But the line appeared continuous, with no visible beginning point. "I cannot tell where it begins, Rinpoche. Where does it end?" Again, Pema searched for evidence of where the drawing had concluded, but found none. "I cannot see where it ends either." Tenzin Norbu nodded slowly. "And yet it exists completely, does it not? This circle that has no beginning and no end is perfectly present, lacking nothing." Over the following days, as Pema remained at the hermitage to learn more about this mysterious teaching, Tenzin Norbu invited him to participate in the daily circle drawing practice. Each morning, they would sit together beside the stone, and the old master would create a fresh circle while Pema watched with careful attention. "Draw your own circle," Tenzin Norbu suggested after several days of observation. Pema took the charcoal and attempted to replicate what he had been watching. But his circle came out lopsided and imperfect, with a noticeable gap where he had struggled to bring the line back to meet its starting point. "It's not right," Pema said with frustration. "I can see where I started and where I tried to finish, and they don't match properly." "Try again," the Lama said gently. "But this time, don't think about beginning or ending. Don't worry about making it perfect. Simply allow the line to flow naturally, without forcing it to be anything other than what it wants to become." Pema attempted the circle again, this time trying to let go of his concern about creating a perfect shape. As he drew, something shifted in his awareness. Instead of focusing on the technical challenge of making the ends meet precisely, he found himself absorbed in the simple act of moving the charcoal across the stone, following the natural curve that seemed to want to emerge. This second circle, while still imperfect by geometric standards, felt somehow more complete than his first attempt. There was a quality of flow and naturalness in the line that hadn't been present when he was trying so hard to control the outcome. "Better," Tenzin Norbu observed. "You are beginning to understand that the circle's perfection doesn't depend on your ability to control it, but on your willingness to participate in its natural unfolding." Over the following weeks, as Pema practiced drawing circles each morning alongside the old master, he began to understand that the exercise was teaching him something far deeper than artistic technique. Each circle became a meditation on the nature of completeness itself, how something could be whole and perfect despite apparent imperfections, how processes could be complete even when they seemed to lack clear beginnings or endings. "Rinpoche," Pema asked one morning as they sat contemplating their freshly drawn circles, "what does the circle represent? Is it a symbol for the wheel of existence, or the endless cycle of birth and death, or perhaps the unity of all phenomena?" Tenzin Norbu smiled with the gentle amusement of a teacher whose student was still trying to understand through concepts rather than direct experience. What if it doesn't represent anything other than itself? He suggested. What if the circle is simply a circle, complete and perfect in its own nature, without needing to stand for some other truth? This response puzzled Pema initially. He had been trained to look for symbolic meanings, to find profound teachings hidden within simple forms. The idea that the circle might be significant simply for what it was, rather than what it represented, challenged his habitual way of seeking understanding. But as his practice with circle drawing continued, Pema began to appreciate this quality of direct presence that didn't require elaborate interpretation. The circle was complete simply by being what it was, a line that curved back to meet itself, creating a form that was whole and unified without needing to signify anything beyond its own wholeness. I think I'm beginning to understand, Pema told the old Lama after several months of daily practice. The circle teaches about completion without achievement, wholeness without accumulation, perfection without improvement. It's already complete simply by being what it is. And what does this teach you about your own nature? Tenzin Norbu asked. Pema considered this question carefully. During his months at the hermitage, something had indeed shifted in his relationship with himself and his spiritual practice. The restless seeking that had driven him from teacher to teacher, from practice to practice, had gradually settled into a more peaceful awareness of present completeness. Maybe I'm already whole, he said slowly. Not as something I need to achieve through practice, but as my basic nature that I can recognize and appreciate right now. Maybe awakening isn't about adding something to myself that's missing, but about recognizing the completeness that's always been present. Tenzin Norbu nodded with deep satisfaction. Now you understand why I draw circles. Each one reminds me that existence itself is already perfect and complete, lacking nothing. The apparent imperfections in my drawings don't diminish their essential wholeness, just as the apparent imperfections in my life don't diminish my Buddha nature. As autumn approached, and the high mountain passes would soon become impassable, Pema prepared to return to the lower valleys and resume his work as a messenger between monasteries. But the teaching he carried with him was simpler and more profound than any he had learned through years of formal study. On his final morning at the hermitage, Tenzin Norbu invited Pema to draw one last circle. This time, as the charcoal moved across the stone, Pema felt no anxiety about perfection, no concern about technique, no need for the circle to represent anything other than the simple joy of allowing a line to flow naturally back to its starting point. When the circle was complete, imperfect by any technical measure, but somehow perfect in its own essential nature, both men sat quietly beside it as the morning sun illuminated the mountains around them. Take this teaching with you, the old Lama said. Wherever you go, whatever you do, remember that your life itself is like this circle, complete and whole in each moment, not needing anything added or taken away to make it perfect. The beginning and end that seem so important to the thinking mind are less real than the eternal present in which all experience unfolds. Years later, when Pema had become an accomplished teacher himself, he would often begin instruction by drawing simple circles, just as Tenzin Norbu had taught him. Students would arrive expecting complex philosophical teachings, but he would offer them charcoal and smooth stones, inviting them to discover in the most elementary of shapes the same profound truth that had transformed his understanding during those months in the high mountain hermitage. the Buddha taught about the wheel of Dharma, he would tell them. But perhaps his deepest teaching was even simpler, that existence itself is already complete, like a circle that needs no beginning to be whole, no ending to be perfect. The Buddha taught, look within. You are the Buddha. This profound recognition points to the fundamental completeness of our essential nature, not something we must achieve through spiritual practice, but something we can discover has always been present, like a circle that is whole regardless of where we might imagine it begins or ends. Why do we struggle so much to recognize this inherent completeness? Buddhist understanding points to our conditioning toward linear thinking, the belief that fulfillment comes through progress from point A to point B, that happiness requires adding something to our current experience, that awakening is a destination we must reach rather than a reality we can recognize right now. The circle intends. Nobu's teaching represents what Buddhist philosophy calls our original nature or Buddha nature, the fundamental awareness and completeness that exists prior to all our stories about inadequacy, spiritual seeking, or needing to become different than we are, like a circle that has no true beginning or end. This essential nature was never damaged by our mistakes and doesn't need to be improved by our achievements. This teaching challenges one of our deepest assumptions about spiritual development, that we must travel from ignorance to wisdom, from suffering to happiness, from our current imperfect state to some future perfected condition. But the circle suggests a different understanding, that we can recognize wholeness right here, completeness in this moment, perfection within apparent imperfection. Pima's journey from seeking complex teachings to appreciating simple presence reflects a common progression in spiritual understanding. Initially, we often believe that profundity must be complicated, that deep truth requires elaborate philosophical frameworks. But as our understanding matures, we discover that the most essential insights are often remarkably simple, so simple that our complex minds may initially overlook them. The practice of drawing imperfect circles illustrates how spiritual realization works. We don't achieve perfect enlightenment through perfect technique, but we recognize inherent wholeness through sincere engagement with whatever capacity we currently have. Each imperfect circle Pema drew was complete in itself, just as each moment of imperfect practice contains the fullness of awakening. This doesn't mean abandoning effort or practice, but rather understanding that our efforts are expressions of our wholeness rather than attempts to create it. Like drawing circles not to achieve some goal but to celebrate the completeness that is already present. Spiritual practice becomes a way of honoring and expressing our Buddha nature rather than trying to manufacture it. The hermitage setting emphasizes how this recognition often requires stepping back from the busyness and complexity of ordinary life. In the simplicity and silence of the mountains, both the old Lama and his student could perceive the essential completeness that is always present but often obscured by mental activity and external distractions. Tenzin Norbu's daily practice of drawing fresh circles each morning suggests how this recognition of wholeness must be renewed continuously. Not because we lose our Buddha nature and must regain it, but because our habitual patterns of thinking constantly cover it over with stories of incompleteness and needing to become different. Tonight, as you rest, you can practice the circle teaching by recognizing the completeness that is already present in this moment. Your awareness doesn't need to be improved to be perfect. It's already whole. Your capacity for peace doesn't need to be developed. It's already complete. Even your tired body and busy mind are perfect expressions of the wholeness that needs nothing added to be exactly what it is. The Buddha said, "Peace comes from within. Do not seek it without. The circle reminds us that this peace isn't hidden in some distant location or future achievement, but present right here as the very nature of awareness itself, complete, unbroken, needing no beginning to exist and no ending to be perfect. As you settle into rest, imagine yourself like Pema, learning to draw circles with acceptance rather than perfectionism, appreciating each breath, each sensation, each moment of awareness as a complete expression of the wholeness that you already are. In recognizing this inherent completeness, you discover that rest itself is not something you must achieve, but something you can allow to unfold naturally from the perfect circle of present moment awareness. As our journey through these ancient teachings draws to a close, take a moment to feel the profound shift that has occurred within you over these past hours. Like the pilgrims who walked around the sacred mountain and discovered they had been seeing only one face of an infinite reality, you have circled through 12 gateways of wisdom, each one revealing a different aspect of the same eternal truth, that peace, wholeness, and awakening are not distant goals to be achieved, but present realities to be recognized and embraced. From Kenjiro's butterfly teaching you about loving without grasping, to the village that learned to hear the fullness within silence, to the student who discovered that single-pointed attention illuminates everything, to the river that showed how burdens transform when we allow them to flow naturally. Each story has been a mirror reflecting back to you your own inherent capacity for wisdom and peace. You have walked with Tenzin as he learned that some seeds require seasons of patient underground development before revealing their extraordinary flowering. You have sat with Dorje discovering that abundance has nothing to do with external success and everything to do with the capacity to receive life fully in each moment. You have climbed the mountain of perspective with 5 travelers who learned that reality is vast enough to contain all viewpoints without being limited by any single one. Through Dhamma's healing presence, you have touched the power of bringing gentle, compassionate attention to your own experience. With Kenji and his paper boat, you have practiced the profound art of creating with love and releasing with joy. In the village that learned to appreciate gradual awakening like the quiet arrival of dawn, you have discovered that the most important transformations happen through patient accumulation rather than dramatic breakthrough. You have held Kamala's empty bowl and learned that true wisdom requires spacious receptivity rather than mental accumulation. And in the hermit's daily circle drawing, you have glimpsed the most fundamental teaching of all, that you are already complete, already whole, already perfect in your essential nature. Like a circle that needs no beginning or end to be perfectly itself, each of these teachings is now woven into the fabric of your being, not as concepts to remember, but as living wisdom that can transform how you meet each moment of your life. When you feel caught in attachment, remember the butterflies teaching about loving without grasping. When overwhelmed by noise and stimulation, recall the villager's discovery of the fullness hidden within silence. When your mind scatters in many directions, return to the student's practice of single-pointed presence. As you carry these teachings into your sleep and your dreams, know that they will continue to work within you like seeds planted in fertile soil. Some insights may blossom immediately, bringing sudden clarity to situations you had found difficult. Others may grow quietly underground for months or years before showing their flowers, ripening in their own perfect timing like the patient seeds in Tenzin's mountain garden. Let your breathing now become like the gentle flow of the river that carried away sorrows, each exhalation releasing whatever tensions or concerns you no longer need to carry, each inhalation drawing in the peace and wholeness that is your birthright. Feel your body settling like Dorje's boat floating peacefully on the mountain lake, held by the vast waters of existence with no effort required on your part. Allow your awareness to become spacious, like the empty bowl that can receive infinite gifts, like the silence that holds all sounds, like the circle that contains completeness without needing to grasp or achieve anything. You are resting now in the same awareness that has always been present, the same Buddha nature that was never absent even during your busiest and most troubled moments. The ancient masters who preserved these teachings through centuries of careful transmission offer you their blessings as you rest. Their wisdom flows through time like water flowing to the sea, carrying the peace they discovered into your present moment. You are part of an unbroken lineage of awakening that stretches back to the Buddha himself and forward to all beings who will someday discover the same truths you have touched tonight. Trust now in the natural process of rest and restoration that knows how to heal your body without conscious effort, how to integrate these teachings without mental struggle, how to prepare you for tomorrow's opportunities to embody the wisdom and compassion you have cultivated. Like dawn arriving quietly in its own perfect timing, your continued awakening will unfold naturally through the simple practice of being present with whatever life brings. May you sleep deeply, held by the vast compassion that surrounds all beings. May your dreams be peaceful, filled with the beauty and wisdom of these ancient teachings. May you wake refreshed and renewed, carrying within your heart the understanding that peace is always available, that wholeness is your true nature, and that every moment offers a fresh opportunity to choose love over fear, presence over distraction, wisdom over ignorance. The journey continues with each breath, each heartbeat, each moment of awareness. But for now, rest completely in the knowing that you have everything you need, that you are exactly where you belong, and that the same infinite awareness that holds the mountains and the stars holds you with perfect, unshakable love. Sleep well, dear friend. The Dharma flows through your dreams, and awakening meets you at every dawn.